Part 1 of Game of Thrones, The Queen's Wizard. In the year 283 after conquest, King's Landing stood at the edge of ruin and history, its streets destined to be remembered not for the grandeur of its founding, but for the fire and betrayal that consumed it. The city began as a small fishing settlement on the eastern coast of Westeros, resting where the Blackwater rush met the sea. Fishermen once worked along its quiet shores, and simple wooden huts stood by the muddy banks. The people lived humble lives, never knowing that their home would one day grow into the heart of a great kingdom. That changed when Aegon Targaryen came ashore. He arrived not alone, but with his sisters Visenya and Rhaenys, and with them came something the world of Westeros had not seen in living memory. Dragons. Great winged beasts of fire and magic that cast shadows across the sky when they flew. From the moment Aegon stepped onto that soil, everything began to change for the continent. The small settlement became a place of conquest and later the capital of a united realm. It was named King's Landing, for it was here that the conqueror first arrived as king in destiny, though not yet in title. From that moment onward, the city grew under the shadow of dragon wings. Stone replaced wood. Walls rose where fishermen once walked. The Red Keep was constructed high above the Blackwater, a fortress meant to endure as long as the Targaryen bloodline endured. For generations, dragons ruled the skies above it, and the people of Westeros came to believe that such power was eternal. King's Landing became the second place in the continent to ever host dragons after Dragonstone, the ancestral seat of House Targaryen. But unlike Dragonstone, which remained a grim volcanic stronghold, King's Landing became a symbol. It was where kings ruled, where lords bowed, where the Iron Throne cast its long shadow over the Seven Kingdoms. And yet even symbols decay. The dragons died in the long centuries after the Dance of Dragons, a brutal civil war that tore House Targaryen apart from within. Fire consumed fire. Kings were lost at the hands of their own blood. In time, the great creatures that once defined an age faded into memory. With their extinction, many believed the magic of Valyria had finally been lost as well. The world entered a quieter era, but also a smaller one, as though something vast and ancient had quietly disappeared from it. The Targaryens survived without their dragons, though the small folk said a dragonless Targaryen was like a lord without lands or a blade without steel. Some even dared to call them shepherds without their dragons, children of an ancient and doomed land. Yet they endured, clinging stubbornly to the Iron Throne with fading strength. In King's Landing, they became less a symbol of divine rule and more a fading echo of a forgotten age, no longer feared as they once were, but still impossible to ignore. Some believed that the Targaryens had once been like gods among men, and that their fall was inevitable. Others whispered that when any power reaches too high, the gods themselves grow jealous and bring ruin upon it. Such stories were told in taverns and markets, especially by those who had never seen Valyria but spoke of it as if they had walked its streets before the doom. By the year 283 after conquest, those whispers felt closer to truth than myth. For King's Landing was burning. The smell of smoke hung heavy over the city, thick enough to sting the eyes and suffocate the breath. Flames roared through streets and towers, devouring timber, stone, and all that lived between. The once proud capital of the Seven Kingdoms had become a battlefield where order had ceased to exist. Steel screamed against steel in narrow alleys. From broken windows came the cries of women who were raped as the city unraveled in their screams. Children called for their parents as they were being slaughtered. The city itself seemed to mourn today. Only days earlier, tension had filled every corner of the capital. The realm was fractured after word came of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen's death at the hands of Robert Baratheon in battle, the man now called the usurper by those still loyal to the crown. The news struck King's Landing like a wound that would not heal. Fear spread quickly, faster than rumor. The people knew, as they always had, that when kings and princes fall, cities do not remain untouched. They burn with them. Queen Rhaella had fled the capital with her youngest son Viserys, sailing for Dragonstone under the protection of loyal retainers. Their departure left a silence within the Red Keep that could not be ignored. King Aerys II remained within its walls, growing more isolated and unstable with each passing day, surrounded by paranoia and fading trust in those around him. The Mad King, as many now called him in whispers too afraid to speak aloud, had become both ruler and prisoner of his own fears. Outside the gates, war approached. The banners of rebellion moved steadily toward the capital. Robert Baratheon's forces, allied with Houses Stark and Arryn, pressed southward like a tide that could no longer be held back. The defenders of the city were few. The gold cloaks, once symbols of civic order, were stretched thin and uncertain in loyalty. Many feared what would come if the city fell into open siege. Hope, however fragile, came in the form of Tywin Lannister. The former hand of the king had long maintained a strained relationship with Aerys, one shaped by pride, humiliation, and political distance. Yet when word reached King's Landing that Tywin marched with the strength of House Lannister, bringing with him 12,000 soldiers, relief spread through the capital like sunlight through storm clouds. The promise was simple: the city would be defended. The Red Keep would stand. The Lannisters would restore order. Civilians believed they had been spared the worst. The gates opened to the Lannister host under the assumption of salvation. What followed was betrayal. Once within the walls, the Lannister forces did not march to defend the crown. They turned their steel upon the defenders of the city. Gold cloaks who expected reinforcement found themselves slaughtered in the streets. Barricades collapsed under sudden assault. The cries of confusion turned into cries of terror as it became clear that the promised protection had become an invasion. The sack of King's Landing had begun. From street to street, the violence spread. Houses were broken into, their contents looted. Fires were set deliberately in places where resistance was strongest, while others burned simply because chaos demanded it. The roar of flames became constant, merging with the sound of collapsing beams and shattering stone. At the heart of it all stood the Red Keep, rising above the city like a silent witness to its own unraveling. Within its walls, King Aerys II remained surrounded by his final loyalists. His mind, already fragile, fractured further with every distant scream that reached the throne room. Suspicion consumed him. He saw betrayal everywhere, in the guards, who stood too still, in the servants who moved too quickly, at every word that carried news of the approaching disaster. Outside, the city he ruled was being taken from him not by foreign dragons or ancient magic, but by men he once trusted. Tywin Lannister's decision had reshaped the fate of Westeros in a single stroke. The man once known for his calculated patience had chosen the moment of ultimate weakness to assert dominance over the capital. His soldiers moved with brutal efficiency, securing strategic points while crushing pockets of resistance without hesitation. The streets of King's Landing became rivers of ash and blood. In Flea Bottom, where the poorest of the city lived, desperation turned into panic. People fled blindly, trampling one another in narrow passages. Some tried to hide in cellars. Others attempted to flee toward the river. In the noble districts, the situation was no different. Wealth offered no protection. Manors that had stood for generations were breached and emptied. Gold, silver, and heirlooms vanished into the hands of soldiers who no longer distinguished between conquest and survival. Above it all, smoke thickened into a dark canopy that blotted out the sky. It was said later that King's Landing looked as if a dragon had returned. But no dragon flew that day. Only men. As the sack continued, the realization settled across the city that this was not merely a military victory. It was the end of an era. The Targaryen rule, which had begun with fire and blood centuries ago, was now being extinguished in fire and betrayal. The dynasty that once believed itself chosen by destiny now faced its final unraveling within the very city it had built into its capital. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Maegor's Holdfast, the innermost fortress, within the mighty Red Keep, had become a place of terror. The fortress that had once been considered unbreakable now echoed with screams, clashing steel, and the smell of blood. The thick stone corridors, built by Maegor Targaryen himself to withstand attacks and siege, were drowning in chaos as the forces of Tywin Lannister stormed through its halls like wolves unleashed upon helpless deer. The defenders of House Targaryen still resisted with desperate courage. Loyal guards fought in narrow corridors, servants attempted to barricade doors, and frightened nobles hid behind locked chambers, praying for salvation that would never come. Yet everyone inside the Holdfast understood the truth that their desperate efforts to cling to life were in vain. The Red Keep was falling. The Lannister soldiers moved through the fortress with frightening speed. They were not simply looting like ordinary soldiers during a sack. They were searching. Room after room was broken open. Doors were smashed from their hinges. Anyone unfortunate enough to stand in their path was butchered without hesitation. Knights died defending corridors already lost. Servants were cut down while begging for mercy. Even noble guests who had once been detained by the Mad King found themselves slaughtered where they stood. Among the countless crimson cloaks flooding the fortress, one soldier moved differently from the others. He ran alone through the corridors, breathing heavily beneath his iron helmet. Unlike the other men who shouted drunkenly while dragging treasures and screaming victims behind them, this soldier carried himself with urgency, almost desperation. He was tall and lean, carrying a spear rather than the sword most Lannister men preferred. A red cloak draped over his shoulders, stained with soot and splashes of blood. Upon his chest was embroidered the golden lion of House Lannister, though the armor itself was plain enough to reveal that he was no knight, merely a common foot soldier among thousands. His face remained hidden beneath his helmet, only the lower half visible. Sweat ran along his jaw as he struggled to catch his breath. He had been running for a long time. The soldier climbed another staircase, boots slamming against the stone as distant screams echoed through the holdfast. His breathing grew harsher with every step. "Shit," he muttered beneath his breath. "Shit, I hope I am not late." His voice trembled slightly. "Otherwise all this suffering will amount to nothing." He reached the second floor and immediately began searching through chambers one after another. Each room revealed scenes more horrifying than the last. A naked servant girl lay dead against a shattered table, her throat cut so deeply her head barely remained attached to her neck. A wounded knight in white armor tried to crawl across the floor while a pair of Lannister soldiers laughed as they stabbed him repeatedly in the back. Further down the corridor, the soldier froze briefly as he witnessed something even worse. 3 Lannister men had cornered 2 noblewomen against a wall. One woman was already dead, her torn dress soaked in blood. The other still struggled weakly while the soldiers laughed like drunken beasts as they were trying to strip her. The young soldier clenched his jaw so tightly it hurt. Disgust burned inside him. The men around him were not soldiers anymore. They were not monsters, nor beasts, but simply men freed to do whatever they wished without fear of consequence. And this was the face of men here, stripped of restraint and unbound by fear. Some were drunk on violence. Others reveled in the freedom that came with the collapse of law and order. The sack of a city transformed ordinary men into creatures capable of unspeakable cruelty, and nowhere was that truth more visible than inside the dying halls of the Red Keep. The soldier looked away and forced himself onward. He could do nothing. He too was powerless, and even if he managed to save them, they would not be spared from the thousands of soldiers gathered outside the Red Keep. Whatever had brought him into this nightmare mattered more. As he continued upward toward the higher floors of the holdfast, his anxiety only worsened. "Fuck you, Mountain," he hissed quietly. "Where are you, you oversized ogre?" So that was it. He had been following Esser Gregor Clegane. Or rather, the thing men called Gregor Clegane. Even among hardened soldiers, the Mountain was feared. Stories followed him wherever he went. Stories of villages burned for amusement. Stories of women violated before their families. Stories of men ripped apart by his bare hands. Many believed he was less man and more beast wrapped in human flesh. The young soldier had followed him into the holdfast but lost sight of him amid the chaos below. Now panic gripped him harder with every passing moment. Because if Gregor Clegane had reached his destination first, then it might already be too late. The soldier climbed another staircase quickly, nearly slipping on blood spread across the stone steps. Somewhere nearby, a woman suddenly screamed. Not the scream of someone startled. The scream of someone witnessing horror. The soldier immediately rushed upward 2 steps at a time. Then he heard it clearly. A woman's desperate plea rang through the corridor, hoarse from terror and grief. "No, no, please. I beg you. Not my son. Please." The words struck him like a hammer. The soldier sprinted toward the sound. As he turned into the corridor, he nearly stopped dead in shock. 2 bodies lay sprawled across the hallway. Royal guards. Even through the blood, the golden cloaks were unmistakable. One of the guards had been cut nearly in half. The upper portion of his body rested several feet away from his legs, his entrails spread across the floor like spilled ropes. The stone beneath him had turned black with blood. The second royal guard leaned lifeless against the wall with his throat crushed inward so violently it looked as though a giant hand had squeezed the life from him. The soldier stared in horror. "What kind of monster is he?" he whispered. "No ordinary man could have done this. Only Gregor Clegane could leave behind such destruction." The woman screamed again. The soldier forced himself to move. He ran past the mangled corpses and reached the chamber from which the cries emerged. Then he stopped as his blood turned cold. Inside the room stood Esser Gregor Clegane, enormous even beneath his armor. He looked less like a knight and more like a towering executioner dragged from the depths of hell itself. Blood covered his steel gauntlets and splattered across the white walls behind him. At his feet lay another dead guard, his skull crushed so completely that fragments of bone and flesh painted the floor. A woman knelt nearby clutching a young child desperately against her chest. Princess Elia Martell. Her silver and gold gown was torn and stained with soot. Tears streamed down her face as she shielded her son with trembling arms. Young Prince Aegon Targaryen cried weakly against his mother's chest, far too young to understand the nightmare unfolding around him. And beneath the large royal bed, another child hid trembling in terror. Princess Rhaenys Targaryen. Tears streamed endlessly down her tiny face, her dark eyes wide with horror as she stared not at the giant knight standing in the room, but at the scene happening beside her. Her maid lay sprawled across the floor, screaming in agony. Esser Amory Lorch stood over the woman with a grin twisted by cruelty. The stout knight looked almost pig-like, his thick face glistening with sweat beneath his helmet. In his hand was a dagger buried deep inside the maid's chest. The woman screamed as he slowly twisted the blade side to side. Yet even while dying, the maid still clung desperately to the knight's leg, using the last of her strength to stop him from reaching the young princess hidden beneath the bed. The sound of her screams filled the chamber. Then Esser Gregor Clegane stepped forward after crushing the last knight's skull, his heavy gaze falling upon the frightened mother and son. Without so much as another glance toward Princess Elia Martell, the mountain drove a brutal kick into her back, hurling her across the floor. The force tore the breath from her lungs, and young Prince Aegon Targaryen slipped instantly from her grasp. Elia screamed and tried to crawl toward her son, but Gregor seized the infant effortlessly with one enormous armored hand. The child looked impossibly small in the giant knight's grasp. The mountain grinned. Yellow crooked teeth appeared beneath his helmet. "Oh, oh, oh," he rumbled in a deep monstrous voice. "Look at you, brat. Purple eyes and silver hair." The infant cried louder. Princess Elia Martell dragged herself toward him desperately. "Please," she begged through tears. "Please, they are children." Gregor ignored her completely. He stared only at the crying infant in his hand. "You know, lad," he said almost conversationally, "your father was the one who knighted me a couple years ago." The mountain chuckled darkly. "Well, I always wanted to kill a Targaryen, and seeing as you're the last one, I suppose you'll do just fine." Then he slowly raised the child higher. The young soldier standing in the doorway froze. Every instinct inside him screamed at him to run. His mind roared with panic. "Run, you idiot. You are not some hero. What if you lose? What if you die?" Backquote. Standing before Gregor Clegane felt like standing before a living avalanche. The sheer size of the man, the brutality radiating from him, and the complete absence of humanity behind his eyes suffocated the room itself. The soldier's body trembled violently. But he forced himself to move. He had suffered too much and endured too much misery to come this far, and running away now would mean the end of him. If he could not face this hardship, he would never survive on this bloody continent. Slowly, his gloved hand slipped inside his cloak. Then he pulled out something small. A black branch of wood around a foot long. 12 inches at most. It looked utterly laughable compared to the armored giant standing before him. Yet the soldier pointed the strange wooden branch toward Gregor with shaking hands. Princess Elia Martell clung desperately to the mountain's leg while begging him to spare her son. The soldier inhaled sharply. Immobilis. The moment the word left his mouth, a small orb of pale blue light burst from the tip of the black wood. The orb shot across the room instantly. It collided directly against Gregor Clegane. Blue light exploded outward. Then the impossible happened. The mountain froze completely still. His eyes widened in shock and fury at what had happened to him, but his massive body remained motionless like stone. The young soldier stared in disbelief at what he had accomplished, something he had once believed unattainable, but fortunately for him, it had worked. Then a scream snapped him back to reality. He turned sharply toward the bed. His blood ran cold. Sir Amory Lorch had dragged Princess Rhaenys Targaryen from beneath the bed and slammed her onto the mattress. The dagger was buried deep in the child's stomach. The little princess stared upward in shock, too overwhelmed even to scream properly anymore. Blood spread rapidly across the sheets beneath her tiny body as her breathing became ragged and uneven. Everything had happened too fast. Before the soldier even had time to react after freezing Gregor, the princess had already been stabbed. Fuck, he cursed. Princess Elia Martell saw it too. Rhaenys, no, my daughter. The woman looked utterly broken, torn between reaching for her wounded daughter and saving her infant son still trapped in Gregor's frozen hand. The soldier reacted instantly. He pointed the wooden branch toward Lorch. Immobilis. Another flash of blue light erupted. Before the knight could even pull the dagger free, his body froze solid. The soldier immediately dropped the branch into his sleeve, gripped the spear in his hand, and charged forward. The spear drove beneath Lorch's neck where the armor failed to fully protect him. The tip burst out from the other side. Blood exploded from the knight's mouth. Lorch's eyes widened with disbelief. The soldier yanked the spear free violently and shoved the dying knight aside. As he collapsed, Sir Amory Lorch managed to glimpse the face hidden beneath the helmet and the red Lannister cloak upon the soldier's shoulders. How, he croaked weakly. Then he fell lifeless onto the floor. At that exact moment, the young soldier heard a strange mechanical sound inside his head. Ding, killed Sir Amory Lorch. The host is rewarded with 200 fate points. The soldier ignored it entirely. His attention snapped back toward Gregor Clegane. The mountain remained frozen, though fury burned murderously inside his eyes. Young Prince Aegon Targaryen still remained trapped in the giant's hand while Princess Elia Martell desperately tried to pry apart the armored fingers. Please help me, she cried, her voice breaking as she looked at him helplessly, unable to summon the strength to save her son from the monster's grasp. The soldier moved beside her immediately. Hold the prince once I stab this monster, he said quickly. Then run to your daughter. She nodded frantically, a small flicker of hope appearing in her watery dark eyes for the first time in that hellish chamber. The soldier gripped his spear tightly. Then, with every ounce of strength he possessed, he rammed it upward beneath Gregor's exposed jaw. The spear pierced deep into the giant's skull. Blood erupted across the soldier's face. Warm metallic liquid splashed onto his lips and inside his mouth, making his stomach churn violently. But fear drove him onward. He pushed the spear deeper and deeper into the mountain's head, terrified the monster might somehow survive. Then, just to be certain, he pointed the wooden branch again. Immobilis. Blue light struck the dying giant once more. Only then did the soldier turn away to help Princess Elia Martell. She was sobbing uncontrollably while struggling to open Gregor's frozen fingers around her son. It's okay, she whispered shakily to the crying infant. Mother will save you, mother will save you. The soldier hurried beside her. Hold the prince, my lady. I will help. Together they forced apart the mountain's fingers enough to free the child. The moment Prince Aegon Targaryen was pulled free, Elia clutched him tightly against her chest. The soldier suddenly heard the strange sound again. Ding, killed Sir Gregor Clegane. The host is rewarded with 500 fate points. He barely acknowledged it. His attention shifted toward the bed. Princess Rhaenys Targaryen was breathing weakly now, her small body trembling from pain and blood loss. Mommy, the little girl whimpered softly. My stomach hurts. Princess Elia Martell nearly shattered hearing those words. Oh, it's okay, my sweetling, she cried while stroking her daughter's hair. Maester Pycelle will heal you, all right. Even she did not believe her own lie. The terror and helplessness inside her eyes made that painfully clear. Then she looked toward the unknown soldier again. Please save her, she begged desperately. I don't know what to do. Tears streamed endlessly from her beautiful eyes. The soldier quickly pulled out a tiny glass bottle containing glowing green liquid. He knelt beside the bed. Princess, he said softly, drink this potion and it will heal the pain in your stomach. The little girl shrank closer to her mother instantly. The red Lannister cloak that he was wearing terrified her. The soldier understood immediately, so he gently handed the potion to Elia instead. My lady, let her drink this. Elia stared at the bottle with trembling hands. Her exhausted mind misunderstood instantly. Will she suffer? She whispered brokenly. I don't want my child to suffer an agonizing end. The soldier blinked in shock before realizing what she meant. Oh no, he said quickly. That is not poison. It will heal her. Please trust me. Princess Elia Martell stared at him silently for a moment. Then, with trembling fingers, she took the potion. She had no choice. Even if there was the smallest chance it might be true, she had to take it for her daughter's survival. Shock and grief had long shattered her ability to question why a Lannister soldier was helping her. Here, my love, she whispered to her daughter. Drink this. You will be all right. The little princess obeyed weakly. The moment she swallowed the potion, she coughed violently, blood spilling from her lips. Elia tensed in panic. Meanwhile, the soldier hurried to the door and listened carefully for approaching footsteps before shutting it tightly. Then he turned back toward the bed. Princess Elia Martell was staring at her daughter in complete disbelief. The bleeding had stopped. The wound in the princess's stomach was healing before her eyes. Flesh slowly closed itself together as though time itself reversed. How? Elia whispered in shock. The soldier approached calmly. Now is not the time for questions, my lady. The princess will heal, but she will sleep for some time. You don't need to worry. Then he glanced toward the infant prince. Give some to the young prince as well. The whole floor is crawling with Lannister soldiers. If they hear children crying, they will come here. Elia immediately nodded. She carefully fed a small amount of the potion to Prince Aegon Targaryen. Slowly, the infant calmed and drifted toward sleep. The room finally grew quieter. Princess Elia Martell finally managed to breathe properly after seeing that her two children were safe, at least for the moment. As she gently laid her sleeping daughter upon the bed, she looked toward the mysterious soldier. Did Rhaegar send you? She asked quietly. Or my brothers? The soldier opened his mouth to answer. Then suddenly both of them heard a rough coughing sound from somewhere inside the room. Cough, cough. Both Princess Elia Martell and the soldier immediately turned toward the sound, tension gripping the room once more. For a terrifying moment, both feared another enemy had survived. Then, from the corner of the chamber, they saw a young woman leaning weakly against the wall. A sword was buried through her chest. The girl looked no older than her late teens. Black hair clung to her pale face while blood soaked the front of her dress. Her olive skin had lost nearly all color, yet despite the agony twisting across her features, she still forced herself to remain standing. You have to flee, my lady, she whispered hoarsely. Mare. Princess Elia Martell rushed toward her immediately. As she reached the wounded servant, panic filled her eyes. It's okay, Elia said desperately while supporting the girl's body. It's okay, Mare. You will be all right. The young woman smiled faintly. Blood stained her teeth crimson, giving her exhausted smile an oddly fierce appearance. I am sorry, my lady, Mare replied weakly. But I think I shall join the stranger very soon. No, Elia said immediately, shaking her head frantically. No, do not say such nonsense. Then suddenly she remembered the potion. Hope flashed across her face. Wait, she said quickly. I will give you the potion. You will be fine just like Aegon and Rhaenys. She hurried back toward the bed and grabbed the nearly empty bottle. Only a little remained. Still, she returned quickly and held it toward the wounded servant. Here, Elia whispered. Drink it. It will heal you. Mare obeyed without argument and swallowed the remaining potion completely. Before anything else could happen, however, the soldier stepped forward suddenly and yanked the sword from her chest. Mare screamed in agony and clutched tightly onto Elia's arm. Princess Elia Martell looked toward the mysterious soldier with confusion and a flash of anger. What or why? The wound would not close while the blade remained inside, the soldier interrupted calmly. So I had to remove it. Elia stared at him anxiously. At least you could have warned me. The soldier ignored the complaint entirely. She will not heal completely, he explained while examining the wound. The bleeding has stopped, which is a good sign, but the wound itself will still need time to heal. Then his voice became serious again. We don't have much time. Soon the last loyal guards of the king will die. After that, more soldiers will flood this floor. Princess Elia Martell paled immediately at his words. But how do we flee? She asked desperately. You said the entire Red Keep is full of rebels. The soldier hesitated. Truthfully, he himself had no idea. This was his first time inside the Red Keep. He barely understood its layout, much less how to escape it safely. Then suddenly he looked toward Elia hopefully. My lady, do you know anything about the secret passages inside the castle? We may escape through those. Elia's face fell. I don't know. Silence filled the room briefly. Then a weak trembling voice interrupted them. I know where one of the secret passages is. Both immediately turned toward Mary. The wounded servant pushed herself shakily away from the wall despite the pain clearly tearing through her body. Where? The soldier asked quickly. Tell us. There is one downstairs, Mary whispered. Near the granary. The soldier's eyes brightened slightly. Mary slowly forced herself upright while hissing softly from pain. I am very sleepy, my lady, she murmured weakly. So I shall try to lead you quickly. Then she looked toward the soldier. Let's go. She turned toward Elia. My lady, carry the young prince. I will take Princess Rhaenys. Princess Elia Martell immediately shook her head. You were wounded. You cannot carry her. Her hopeful gaze shifted toward the soldier instead. But Mary interrupted firmly. No, my lady. He needs both hands free to protect us. He cannot carry the princess while fighting. Then she forced a faint smile. I am not bleeding anymore. Elia hesitated before finally nodding weakly. Instead of handing over Rhaenys, however, she carefully passed sleeping Prince Aegon Targaryen into Mary's arms. Take Aegon instead, she whispered. He is lighter. I will carry Rhaenys. Mary accepted the prince carefully. The soldier moved toward the chamber door and cautiously inspected the corridor outside. Then he whispered toward Mary. How do we reach the granary? We must return to the first floor, she replied quietly. The granary is only a short distance from the stairs. The soldier nodded. Stay behind me, he ordered softly. The moment I say stop or run, you obey immediately. Both women nodded. The soldier stepped into the corridor first. The hallway remained eerily silent now except for distant screams echoing somewhere below. As they moved carefully through the corridor, a Lannister soldier suddenly emerged from a side chamber carrying stolen treasures in his arms. One was a heavy golden chalice decorated with rubies. The other appeared to be an expensive Myrish lace gown stolen from some noblewoman's chambers. The looting soldier froze upon seeing them. But before he could react, the mysterious soldier pointed his wooden branch toward him. Immobilis. A flash of blue light struck the man instantly. The soldier froze mid-step, his frightened eyes still moving helplessly while his body remained completely rigid. Both Elia and Mary stared in amazement. Neither understood what strange power the mysterious man wielded. But this was not the time for questions. Stay close, the soldier whispered. They hurried toward the staircase. As they passed the bodies of the fallen royal guards, Princess Elia Martell slowed briefly. Esser Bresbury, she whispered sorrowfully. Her eyes lingered upon the dead golden cloaks. Mary gently touched her arm. Let us go, my lady, she said softly. Do not let their sacrifice be wasted. Elia swallowed painfully before following again. When they reached the second floor, loud shouting echoed from below. The soldier cautiously peered over the staircase. At least a dozen Lannister men filled the courtyard beneath them. Some searched rooms while others laughed among piles of stolen valuables. The path toward the granary was blocked. The soldier frowned as he thought deeply, searching for a solution. After a short while, his expression softened slightly, as though an idea had finally formed beneath the helmet that hid his face. He turned toward the women. There are too many soldiers below, he whispered. I will distract them. Both women immediately became tense. If I fail, he continued calmly, you run toward the secret passage. Immediately. Do not wait for me. Reluctantly, both nodded. Then suddenly the soldier rushed toward the balcony overlooking the courtyard and shouted loudly. Quick! Don't let them escape. The soldiers below startled immediately and looked upward. The disguised soldier pointed dramatically toward the northern side of the fortress. I saw someone carrying a silver-haired infant running north. Instant panic spread among the soldiers. The Dornish whore is escaping. Hurry! Without even questioning the claim, the Lannister men rushed away like brainless wolves chasing prey. Within moments, the courtyard nearly emptied. The soldier turned back toward the women and nodded. Quickly, they descended the stairs. They almost reached the granary safely. Almost. A single Lannister soldier suddenly rounded the corner at full speed, apparently rushing toward the courtyard after hearing the commotion. He collided directly into the disguised soldier. Both crashed onto the floor. "Watch where you are going, you horse pie." The man's words died instantly. He had seen the two women behind the fallen soldier. More importantly, he saw the silver-haired infant in Meray's arms. His eyes widened in horror. The disguised soldier immediately scrambled toward the fallen wooden branch. The collision with the Lannister soldier had knocked both his spear and wooden stick from his grasp. At the same time, the Lannister soldier reached for his sword. Then suddenly blood sprayed across the wall. The soldier blinked in confusion. The Lannister man collapsed lifelessly beside him, his throat opened completely. Standing behind him was Meray. Even while holding Prince Aegon Targaryen in one arm, she held a bloody dagger in the other. The mysterious soldier stared at her. Briefly, Meray simply nodded once. No fear existed in her eyes now. Only determination. The soldier quickly retrieved both his spear and wooden branch before leading them onward. Past the granary they found a narrow hidden alley nearly invisible unless someone inspected the walls carefully. At the far end was a tiny concealed entrance barely large enough to crawl through. Meray moved first. Princess Elia Martell followed while carrying the sleeping Princess Rhaenys Targaryen. The soldier paused briefly and glanced behind him one last time toward the ruined corridors of the holdfast before entering after them. He closed the hidden door behind him instantly. Darkness swallowed the tunnel. Everything was quiet except for the heavy breathing of those inside it. The soldier raised the strange wooden branch and muttered softly. "Lumos." Soft white light bloomed from its tip. Both women stared at the glowing stick with obvious curiosity, though neither asked questions. The tunnel stretched deep beneath the castle, damp and cold. "Where does this passage lead?" the soldier asked quietly. Meray answered while guiding them forward. "These tunnels connect to many places. Some lead to royal chambers. Others to different parts of the Red Keep." The soldier thought silently for a moment. Then he asked another question. "What is the safest way to flee King's Landing?" Meray frowned slightly. "Where exactly are you planning to take us?" "Outside the city first," he replied. "Then perhaps to Dorne." Princess Elia Martell shook her head immediately. "That is impossible by land. The rebels would search every road south. A ship would be safest." "But the docks will already be filled with Lannister soldiers," Meray argued quietly. "Going unnoticed there would be difficult." The soldier nodded grimly. "And when they fail to find your bodies in the chambers, they will search the entire city." Both women became visibly tense. "We cannot remain here forever," Elia whispered desperately. Silence followed briefly. Then the soldier finally spoke. "Then Dragonstone is our best option." Both women looked at him. "We reach Dragonstone first," he continued, "and decide the rest later." Elia slowly nodded. But Meray still looked uncertain. "No ships will willingly sail there now," she pointed out. "The Queen resides on Dragonstone. The rebels will monitor every vessel." Another uncomfortable silence followed. Then finally the soldier said calmly, "Don't worry about the ship. I can handle that part somehow. Just lead us to the nearest passage close to the docks." Meray thought briefly before replying. "There is one exit near the Blue Flower Pleasure House." The soldier gave her a strange look before sighing. "Fine. Lead the way." They continued deeper into the tunnels. After some time, the soldier suddenly asked quietly, "Why did you not flee before the sack began?" Princess Elia Martell sighed bitterly. "It was impossible. The king stationed Kingsguard outside my chambers constantly. It was his order." She gently patted the sleeping Princess Rhaenys Targaryen in her arms as they walked. Then, after another stretch of silence, Elia finally spoke again. "By the way, what is your name?" The soldier remained silent for several moments. "I understand if you don't wish to answer," Elia added softly. Nly wished to know the name of the man who saved my children. The mysterious soldier cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, actually my name is Merlin. The words left his mouth with surprising calmness as he spoke his name for the first time before others and waited quietly for their reaction. Princess Elia's face changed immediately. The exhaustion that had settled into her features since their escape seemed to lift just slightly, replaced by something warmer. Relief, perhaps. Our curiosity finally satisfied. Melon, she repeated slowly, tasting the unfamiliar name as if it belonged to a foreign land or language. Melon. What a strange name. I have never heard it before. Does it have an SOC origin? When Merlin heard her say his name, he could not help himself. A quiet laugh slipped from him, soft and brief, but enough to make Elia tilt her head in confusion. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with honest uncertainty. Why did you laugh? Did I say something wrong? He shook his head at once, raising a hand as if to calm her concern. Oh no, it is not serious. It is just that my lady pronounced my name wrong. That only deepened her confusion. She glanced toward Mary for confirmation, but the servant only shrugged slightly, as if she too was uncertain whether names from strange lands came with rules or not. Elia returned her gaze to Merlin, more determined now than before. Then you must say it properly, she said. If I am to speak it, I should speak it correctly. Merlin nodded once, obliging her request. He spoke slowly and clearly, as though patiently teaching a child who had just spoken its first word. It's pronounced like Merlin, my lady. He separated the syllables carefully, as if guiding her through each sound. Elia repeated it at once. Mer. She paused, concentrating. Lin. Merlin nodded approvingly. Yes, that is it. A faint smile formed on Elia's lips, as if she had just mastered something unexpectedly important. She repeated it again under her breath, quieter this time, almost testing it. Merlin. Merlin. They continued walking as she practiced, her voice weaving into the rhythm of their cautious steps through the narrow tunnels beneath the Red Keep. The air was damp and ancient, heavy with the smell of wet stone that had never known sunlight. Every few steps the path split into different tunnels, and each time they reached a dead end, they were forced to stop, reconsider their direction, and retrace their steps before choosing yet another uncertain path. At one point, after hours of wandering beneath the Red Keep, they reached yet another dead end, a wall of stone that offered no passage forward. Mary cursed under her breath and, somewhat reluctantly, admitted she was not nearly as familiar with these passages as she had claimed, especially after enduring the doubtful gazes of Merlin and Elia, both of whom had placed their trust in her knowledge of the tunnels. I have only used this route a few times, she confessed, avoiding Elia's gaze. And those times were when exactly? Elia asked sharply. Mary hesitated. When I needed to leave the castle quietly. The silence that followed was awkward. And then she added, far too quickly, to visit the pleasure houses. Elia stopped walking. Her expression shifted instantly into something far more dangerous than exhaustion. It was the kind of silence that carried judgment without a single word. Mary immediately raised her hands. I went with other servants. It was not alone, and only for betting and gambling, nothing more. That explanation did not improve her situation. Elia's glare sharpened. Merlin, walking slightly ahead, glanced back at them. He looked less like a man escaping a burning city and more like someone watching a strange argument unfold in a peaceful courtyard. For a moment, it almost felt absurd. Behind them, King's Landing was falling into the hands of rebels, yet here in the dark tunnels beneath it, a servant was being judged for gambling debts. Still, perhaps that was what survival looked like. The world didn't stop being human simply because it was collapsing. Eventually, Elia exhaled slowly and continued walking. The argument faded behind them as they moved deeper into the tunnels once more, the silence returning like a blanket. After what felt like hours of wandering, turning, retracing steps, and climbing uneven stone paths, they finally arrived at what Mary claimed was their exit. A small circular opening sealed from the outside. Merlin stepped forward and examined it. We stop here, he said quietly. I will go out first and see what is happening. I will also try to find a ship that can take us to Dragonstone or Dorne. Elia's eyes tightened slightly at the mention of separation. "Please be careful, Sir Merlin," she said softly. "We will be waiting here. May the Seven keep you in their prayers." Merlin gave a faint smile at the title she used for him. "I am not a knight, my lady. Just Merlin will do. And thank you." Before he left, Mary quickly stepped forward and gave him directions in a rushed whisper. "When you exit, you will find yourself near the end of a narrow alley. At the far end is the Blue Flower Pleasure House. If you go east from there, you will reach Mud Gate. Near it is the dock district. You will find fishing boats, river skiffs, and smuggler ships. Someone will take us across Blackwater Bay if you have coin or persuasion." Merlin nodded, committing every detail to memory. He then asked for Mary's dagger and, after receiving it, tucked it into his belt. He gave her his only weapon, a spear, so she would have something to defend herself with. Then he extinguished the light spell from his wooden branch. After one final glance at Elia, who still watched him with cautious hope, he pushed open the exit. Cold air rushed in. He stepped out to the surface. The world above was darker than he expected. It was late evening. The sky had already begun to fade into deep shades of gray and blue. The city around him was unnaturally quiet, not peaceful, but emptied, as if King's Landing itself had been butchered alongside its people by the Lannister knights. Merlin paused in the narrow alley and listened. No screams of women or children, no clash of steel between the Targaryen and Lannister knights, none of the chaos that had defined the afternoon he witnessed. Only distant footsteps, occasional barking dogs, and the muffled sound of horses. He exhaled slowly. So it is done. The city has fallen in the hands of Tywin Lannister. He thought bitterly. He did not need confirmation. The absence of resistance spoke louder than any announcement. The Lannister forces had taken control, and the city had been subdued. Merlin adjusted his grip on the wooden branch and began walking. He emerged from the alley onto a wider street. On his left stood what remained of a pleasure house. Once vibrant, it was now reduced to charred ruins. Blackened beams jutted from collapsed walls, and smoke stains still clung to the stone, a reminder of whatever unspeakable acts might have taken place there. Lannister soldiers moved through the streets in groups. Some stood around fires, drinking, laughing, and exchanging stories of the day's tragedy. Their voices were loud, careless, and arrogant, filled with pride that felt almost celebratory. They spoke of who they had killed, who had killed more, and the different ways they had taken the lives of their so-called enemies, many of whom were children and defenseless small folk. They also spoke freely of the spoils they had taken, which they believed were rightfully theirs. Merlin walked past them without drawing attention. The Lannister cloak he wore, along with the sigil on his armor, granted him silence. No one questioned him or stopped him. As he pushed further east, the streets grew eerily quiet. The small folk had either fled, been slaughtered, or barricaded themselves behind shuttered doors. What remained were the dead, bodies left where they had fallen, untouched and unclaimed, their fearful kin too terrified to drag them inside. He passed through long streets until he reached a wide-open road leading to the docks. On the far side rose a large gate guarded by Lannister soldiers. Beyond it, the wind was seasoned with the sea's own blood. Blackwater Rush stretched into the Blackwater Bay, dark and endless. Ships and boats filled the harbor, some anchored, some waiting, some trying to leave but blocked by patrols. Merlin slowed his pace, surveying the area. So this is where I have to find a ship to take us out of this hellhole. He crossed the gate without difficulty, his disguise still working in his favor. The dock district was chaotic in a different way. Not violent, but tense. Fishermen shouted at soldiers. Merchants argued over delayed cargo. Travelers pleaded for passage. No ship was allowed to leave without permission. The port was closed. Merlin scanned the area carefully until he found a man sitting near a small fire. The man looked tired, salt-stained, and bitter. A fisherman by the look of him. Merlin approached him and spoke in a low and calm voice. What is happening here? Why do the shipmen look like they are about to start their own rebellion? The man glanced at him, then noticed the Lannister cloak. His expression tightened, but he held his tongue. And you don't know, the fisherman said, his tone edged with contempt. Yet you wear that cloak. I just came from inside the city, Merlin replied calmly. I don't know what has been decided here. The man let out a rough sigh. They have closed the docks. No ship is allowed to leave or unload. Fishermen are stuck. Merchants are furious. Everyone is waiting while soldiers decide what becomes of them. Merlin looked toward the harbor. So that's why the fat merchants are arguing with our soldiers. They really do care about their goods, he said quietly. The fisherman gave a bitter laugh. Aye, and fishermen like me care about fish rotting in the hold while we are forced to sit and watch. Merlin studied him more carefully now. Are you a shipmaster? The man shook his head. No, just a humble fisherman. Disappointment flickered briefly in Merlin's mind, but he pressed on. Then who commands your ship? Suspicion replaced fatigue in the fisherman's expression. Why do you ask? Don't tell me you're going to help our drunken shipmaster in exchange for ale. Merlin narrowed his gaze slightly, letting the authority of the Lannister identity press forward just enough. Careful. I asked a simple question. Don't make it complicated. The fisherman stiffened at his cold voice, then quickly nodded. Fine, fine, I will take you. He stood and led Merlin through the crowded dock area. They passed anchored fishing vessels, small merchant boats, and larger ships held in place by guards. Eventually, they reached a modest fishing ship. Not grand or a powerful one, but sturdy enough to survive the bay. The fisherman knocked on the cabin door of the ship. The knock echoed across the wooden hull of the fishing vessel, dull and heavy, quickly swallowed by the restless noise of the harbor beyond. For a few moments, there was only silence from inside the cabin. Then came the sound of something falling over, followed by a rough drunken voice. Oh, for fuck's sake, who is it now? The fisherman beside Merlin shifted awkwardly before raising his voice. It's me, Soda, sir. A pause followed. Then the voice answered from deeper inside the cabin, louder this time and carrying the thick slur of a man far too deep into his cups. If you came to take my life, then don't bother. I have not slept with your mother for a long time, so she is probably warming some other bastard's bed in a brothel by now. Not that she was beautiful to begin with. Soda grimaced so hard it looked physically painful to endure. Merlin almost pitied him. It is a Lannister soldier who wishes to speak with you. See, Captain, Soda said awkwardly. After long silence from inside, came the sound of uneven footsteps stumbling across wood, followed by the scraping of bolts being undone. The cabin door creaked open. A large man stepped into view. He was older than Soda by at least 20 years, broad-shouldered and thick-armed from decades at sea. His weathered skin was darkened by salt and sun, and his beard was wild and uneven, streaked heavily with gray. One eye looked slightly more open than the other, likely the result of too much ale rather than injury. But despite the drunkenness, the man's gaze sharpened immediately upon seeing the crimson cloak and golden lion upon Merlin's armor. His expression hardened at once. What more do you lot want from me? The shipmaster growled. If you came to humiliate me, then don't bother. I have already been humiliated enough today. His words stumbled over each other from drink, yet there was still resentment buried beneath them. Merlin did not waste time. Let us speak alone. The older man stared at him for several seconds before stepping aside and opening the cabin door wider. Well then, he muttered hoarsely. Come in, Great Lion Knight. Merlin entered. The cabin smelled like uncleaned bathrooms, seawater, and enough alcohol to drown a small army. Empty bottles littered the floor beside overturned mugs, while a dim lantern hanging from the ceiling swayed gently with the movement of the ship. Behind him, the shipmaster turned toward Soda and muttered something too low to hear before shutting the door firmly. The moment the door closed, the noise of the harbor became distant and muffled. The shipmaster stumbled toward a table cluttered with maps, mugs, and bottles before dropping heavily into a chair. So, he said while reaching for another bottle. To what do I owe the pleasure of the great knight of Lannister? Merlin remained standing as his eyes quietly inspected the cabin. I need your ship. The shipmaster blinked once. Then he barked out a short humorless laugh. My ship, he repeated. Your lions have already taken the city, blocked the harbor, and chained every poor bastard to these docks. Now you come asking for boats too. I am not here for cargo, Merlin replied calmly. I need passage. Out of the city. Immediately. The older man narrowed his eyes. Everyone wants to leave, he said sharply. Merchants. Sailors. Nobles hiding from their enemies. Cowards. Running from war. But no ship leaves this harbor without the Lannisters allowing it. Merlin glanced toward the small round window beside the table. Outside, the harbor remained tightly controlled. Soldiers patrolled between ships in pairs. Torches flickered along the docks while nervous sailors argued with armed guards. No vessel could move without drawing attention. The harbor was a cage. And cages required distractions if one wished to escape them. The shipmaster followed Merlin's gaze before looking back at him. "Aren't you one of them?" he asked suspiciously. "Why not ask your Lord Commander for permission?" "I don't have time for permission." The answer made the older man study him more carefully. Then slowly, a crooked grin spread across his face. "Ah," he said knowingly. "So it is that kind of business." He pointed drunkenly toward Merlin. "You are hiding something from your masters. Otherwise you wouldn't be sneaking around a fishing boat at night." Merlin rolled his eyes slightly. "Something like that." The shipmaster leaned back in his chair with a smug expression, clearly pleased with his own deduction. "If I help you," he said, "and the Lannisters discover it, then I lose my ship, my crew, and probably my head." "You will be paid well," Merlin answered with a lie. "More gold than this ship sees in years. Dozens of golden dragons." The older man snorted loudly. "The fact you are willing to pay that much tells me this job is far too dangerous." He pointed a thick finger toward Merlin. "Listen, lad. I have a family. Annoying bastards, but still family. My crew have families too. I am not sailing us into death for some mysterious lion knight with secrets." He waved a dismissive hand. "So no. Find another fool." Merlin stayed silent for several moments. The shipmaster frowned slightly. Then Merlin spoke. Softly. "I am sorry about this." The older man looked irritated. "About what?" "Imperio." A pale white light flashed through the cabin. The spell struck the shipmaster directly in the chest. For a single moment, the older man stiffened violently. Then the resistance vanished from his face. His eyes became distant and empty, and a quiet calm settled over his once irritated expression. Merlin immediately grabbed the edge of the table as pain exploded through his body. A violent cough tore from his throat, and blood splattered across the wooden floorboards. "Damn it," he muttered between breaths. "Using strong spells like this is still difficult." His chest burned as though heated iron had been shoved into his lungs. For now, his body was nowhere near strong enough to withstand the pressure of the spell. Still, the spell had worked. He slowly straightened himself before looking toward the now obedient shipmaster. "What is your name?" "Soman," the man answered blankly. "How many crew members do you have?" 9 crew members and with me 10. Merlin nodded slowly. "And how long will it take for this ship to reach Dragonstone?" Soman answered without hesitation. "With a royal ship and favorable winds, 1 day. With this fishing vessel, 2 or 3 days at most." Merlin considered that carefully. Longer than he wanted, but still better than nothing. "Good," he said. "You will prepare the ship quietly. No suspicious behavior. No sudden movements that might alert the Lannister soldiers." Soman nodded mechanically. Merlin said with seriousness, "I will cause a disturbance at the docks to give us a chance to sail away. Hopefully it works. When the distraction begins in the harbor, you will begin sailing immediately. I will return with 2 passengers." Merlin walked toward the cabin door before stopping midway. "One more thing." Soman looked up blankly. "Clean this cabin." The older man blinked slowly. "There will be women traveling with us." Without waiting for a response, Merlin opened the cabin door and stepped back onto the deck. Cold harbor air hit him immediately. Behind him, Soda glanced nervously between Merlin and the cabin, clearly trying to understand what had just happened. Merlin ignored him entirely. His mind was already moving toward the next phase. The plan for creating a distraction. He stepped off the fishing vessel and onto the crowded docks once more. Torches flickered in the growing darkness while soldiers laughed around fires and sailors shouted in frustration. After leaving Soman's ship, Merlin made his way back toward the harbor gate with steady steps, his helmet lowered just enough to shadow most of his face. The deeper darkness of evening had finally settled over King's Landing, yet the docks remained alive with noise and torchlight. Merchants still argued with guards, sailors cursed the delays, and drunken soldiers wandered the streets as they basked in their glory of today's victory. Merlin slowed near the gate and quietly observed the surroundings. He needed fewer soldiers watching the harbor when the time came. The fewer eyes present, the better the chances of escaping unnoticed. His gaze moved carefully across the area until he spotted 2 Lannister soldiers standing near a patch of overgrown bushes beside the wall. Both men were seated on overturned barrels with mugs of ale in their hands, speaking loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear. Merlin crouched silently behind the bushes. Opposite them, slowly, he pulled out his wand. His fingers tightened around it as he prepared to strike, but then one of the soldiers spoke again, drawing Merlin's attention. "I heard Lord Tywin was furious after learning Gregor Clegane got killed." The second soldier snorted loudly. "Well, I still can't believe it myself. Who in the 7 hells kills that monster?" The first man leaned closer, lowering his voice slightly even though both were drunk. "They say Gregor and that mad dog Lorch were found dead inside the Dornish princess's chambers." The second soldier blinked. "The princess escaped." "Aye, her and the children both vanished." Merlin's eyes narrowed slightly. "So they are still searching for her. If even ordinary soldiers know of it, then the entirety of King's Landing is under strict investigation." The second soldier scratched at his beard. "But how? Wasn't she locked away by the Mad King himself? Surrounded by guards and all that?" The first man shrugged. "Could have been her family. Everyone knows the Dornish are mad when it comes to protecting their own. Maybe that brother of hers did it. A baron." "Aye, him. That snake prince came with plenty of sellswords." The second soldier grunted before taking another drink. "Well, whoever did it, I don't care. I just want this whole business over so I can visit a pleasure house and find myself a Tyroshi whore. You will get your chance soon enough. They say the usurper's brother is still under siege by the Tyrells and stuck there. The help sent to them should arrive in 3 or 4 days. The usurper himself has already arrived with his army, but he sent the Starks to save his brother's ass and homeland, so I say we will be here for a few more days." "So we will still be here for a few more days then, huh?" "Probably." Merlin quietly absorbed every piece of information. Robert was already in King's Landing. And Stannis remained under siege with his fleet, which he would surely sail here the moment the Starks rescued him. If necessary, he would dock in every available port in the city. That meant the city would soon become even more dangerous than it already was, and then they would have no way left to escape. He raised his wand. 2 silent flashes shot through the darkness. The soldiers froze instantly. Both men stiffened in place like statues, unable to move or speak. Merlin moved quickly toward them. He crossed the distance in seconds, drew the dagger from his belt, and plunged it into the first soldier's chest directly over the heart. A muffled gasp escaped the man's throat. The second died moments later. Merlin caught the bodies before they collapsed loudly and dragged them into the bushes one at a time, covering them as best as he could beneath shadows and overgrown weeds. For several moments, he simply stood there breathing quietly. Then he looked down at his bloodied hands. "Fuck," he muttered under his breath. The word came out hollow. "Who would have thought someone like me would end up killing people left and right without even feeling guilt anymore?" His eyes lingered on the bodies. A bitter laugh escaped him. "This damned world made me into a killer." He rubbed his face tiredly before lightly smacking the side of his own head. "Get yourself together," he whispered. "What are you now? Some brooding vigilante?" The absurdity of comparing himself to Batman in the middle of a medieval harbor almost made him laugh again. Almost. Instead, he pushed the thoughts aside and continued moving. Over the next stretch of time, Merlin carefully reduced the number of guards around the outer docks. He avoided groups and targeted isolated soldiers only when he was certain their disappearance would not immediately be noticed. Some were lured into dark alleys. Others vanished behind abandoned warehouses. Every body was hidden. Every kill was quick. But he avoided unnecessary risks. If soldiers stood too close together or patrols moved frequently nearby, he simply passed them by. There was no point dying over greed. Once he finished, Merlin made his way back toward the alley near the burned remains of the Blue Flower Pleasure House. The city around him felt even quieter now. Or perhaps he had simply grown numb to it. Reaching the hidden entrance, he knocked carefully against the stone. Moments later, the concealed opening shifted. Merlin slipped inside. Darkness greeted him immediately. With a flick of his wand, soft light illuminated the tunnel. Both women instinctively shielded their eyes for a moment after sitting so long in darkness. Elia rose quickly. "What happened?" she asked anxiously. "Is there a way out for us, Sir Merlin?" Merlin noticed the hope in her expression. It was fragile one, dangerously fragile for the face of a princess. Still, he nodded. "Yes," he answered. "There is a ship waiting for us. It will take us to Dragonstone." Relief spread visibly across Mare's face while Elia closed her eyes briefly, almost as though thanking the gods in silent prayer. Merlin then noticed movement beneath Elia's chest. Little Rhaenys had awakened. The young princess stared at him curiously with tired dark eyes, still too young to fully understand the events unfolding around her. Mare immediately stood. "Then we should leave before something goes wrong." Merlin handed the clothes and robes he had stolen from abandoned homes to the women. "Wear these," he said quietly. "And cover the prince's hair. His silver hair draws too much attention." Elia nodded immediately. "I understand." Merlin stepped outside the passage once more to give them privacy. Several minutes later, the hidden entrance opened again. Both women now wore dark cloaks and rough common clothing beneath them. Their noble appearance had been dulled as much as possible, though Elia still carried herself with too much grace to truly resemble a commoner. Rhaenys remained hidden beneath layers of cloth in Elia's arms. Merlin studied them briefly before nodding. "Stay close to me. Don't speak unless necessary." The three of them moved carefully through the streets. Several times they were forced to hide behind ruined buildings or abandoned carts while Lannister patrols passed nearby. Torches swept across streets only moments away from them more than once. Every second felt stretched thin. At last, they reached the harbor gate. Merlin exhaled quietly in relief. The dead soldiers still had not been discovered. A miracle in itself. He motioned for the women to remain hidden behind stacked cargo near the alley while he moved ahead alone. Crossing through the gate once more, Merlin walked calmly toward the opposite side of the docks where several abandoned merchant vessels remained moored together. He quickly entered the first ship. Inside were crates filled with lamp oil, cloth, and dry timber. Perfect. With controlled movements, he spread oil across the lower deck before igniting it with fire. Flames immediately began feeding hungrily upon the wood. Merlin moved to the next vessel. Then another. Smoke soon began rising into the night sky. By the time he returned toward the gate, the first shouts had already started. "Fire! Get water! The ships are burning!" Within moments, chaos erupted across the harbor. Sailors rushed toward their vessels in panic while merchants screamed about their cargo. Dockworkers ran wildly carrying buckets while flames spread from one ship to another. Lannister soldiers immediately abandoned their posts and charged toward the burning vessels. The harbor became madness. Exactly as Merlin intended, he hurried back to Elia and Mare. "Now," he said sharply. The women followed him immediately. Amidst the confusion, smoke, shouting crowds, and running soldiers, the three slipped through the gate unnoticed. Nobody paid attention to a few cloaked figures while half the harbor burned. They quickly crossed toward the opposite side of the docks where Somon's fishing vessel waited. The crew were already loosening ropes and preparing the sails. Somon himself stood near the helm barking orders with surprising authority despite the alcohol still lingering in his system. Merlin turned toward Elia. "Go inside the cabin, my lady." Quickly. Mare entered first with Aegon hidden beneath her cloak while Elia followed behind. Several crewmen glanced suspiciously toward the hooded figures disappearing into the shipmaster's cabin. Before any of them could question it, Somon roared across the deck. "What are you staring at, you useless bastards? Move. The sea is waiting for us." The crew immediately returned to work. Slowly, the ropes were released. The fishing vessel drifted away from the docks. Merlin stepped beside Somon near the edge of the deck and watched as the burning ships illuminated the waters of Blackwater Rush with flickering orange light. More and more Lannister soldiers flooded into the harbor trying to contain the disaster. And amidst all the confusion, panic, and fire, very few noticed one small fishing vessel quietly slipping away into the dark waters of the Blackwater Rush. The first pale light of dawn stretched across the horizon as the ship sailed quietly through the calm waters of Blackwater Bay. The sea was gentle this morning, almost unnaturally peaceful after the chaos and bloodshed of the previous night. Soft waves struck against the sides of the vessel in a slow rhythm while the cold morning wind swept across the deck carrying with it the scent of salt and freedom of the ocean. Merlin stood alone near the railing of the ship with both hands resting against the damp wood. His long dark cloak fluttered slightly behind him as his tired eyes remained fixed upon the endless sea ahead. Beneath the fading darkness of the night the waters looked silver beneath the first touch of sunlight. He could finally breathe properly. Inside the cabin Princess Elia Martell slept alongside her children while Mary rested nearby after the long nightmare they had survived. Even in sleep their faces still carried exhaustion and fear. The terror of the sack of King's Landing had not fully left them yet, but at least for now they were alive and safe from the monsters that had hunted them. That alone made everything worth it. Merlin slowly exhaled as he lowered his gaze toward the sea beneath him. Even now he could hardly believe what he had done. He had infiltrated the city during its fall. He had entered the Red Keep. He had killed Esser Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorch. And somehow against all odds he had escaped alive with Elia Martell and her children. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. If someone had told him 3 months ago that he would stand upon a ship in the world of Westeros after saving members of House Targaryen during Robert's rebellion, he would have called them insane. 3 months ago he had been nothing more than an ordinary young man in his early 20s living a completely normal life on Earth. A life that now felt distant and unreal. Merlin closed his eyes for a moment as old memories slowly resurfaced within his mind. He remembered his family. Despite everything he still loved them deeply. His childhood had not been perfect. Far from it. Most of the unhappiness within their home came from his father. The man had never truly treated his mother well. Arguments were common within the house and many times those arguments turned ugly. His father often shouted and abused while his mother quietly endured everything without fighting back. That was simply the kind of woman she was. A gentle, patient and too forgiving for her own good. She came from a poor traditional village family that never valued girls. Unlike her brothers, she had never been allowed to study in school. Instead she had been married off at only 17 years old to a man nearly 10 years older than her. At first her marriage had not been terrible. In fact she had been happy. For a village girl who had spent her entire life under strict traditions, simply living freely in the city had felt like a dream. She experienced things she had once thought impossible. Markets filled with lights, busy streets, new clothes, restaurants, festivals. She treasured every small thing. For a while his parents had genuinely loved each other. Then everything changed. His father developed a relationship with another woman from his workplace. The affair poisoned the entire family little by little. Merlin still remembered the pain in his mother's eyes when she first discovered it. Yet even then she accepted it. Not because she approved of it, but because she feared losing the fragile life she had built. She had sacrificed too much already. In the end she even agreed to let his father marry the other woman if it would keep the family together. That decision had infuriated Merlin's grandmother, who strongly opposed the idea of taking a second wife. Out of respect for his mother his father eventually ended the relationship, but the damage had already been done. Their marriage never recovered afterward. Even so his father remained present in the family. He worked hard. He paid for their education. He helped his children study. But Merlin could never fully forgive him for the way he treated his mother. She had always been innocent. Too innocent. The kind of woman who smiled despite her own suffering. The kind of woman who would sacrifice everything for her children. And in the end that very kindness became the reason for his death. Merlin's fingers tightened slightly against the railing as the memory returned with painful clarity. The burning building. Even now he could almost smell the smoke. 3 months ago their house had caught fire in the middle of the night. Flames spread rapidly through the building while everyone desperately tried to escape. Merlin still remembered the screams of his neighbors, the uncomfortable heat, the panic of the crowd. Then he witnessed his mother running back inside. At first he thought she had gone mad. The entire building was collapsing and yet she rushed into the flames without hesitation. Why? For school documents. For her children's certificates and educational achievement papers. It sounded absurd, stupid even, but that was how much she valued education. A woman who had never been allowed to attend school herself treasured her children's accomplishments more than anything else in the world. She proudly showed their achievements to relatives and neighbors as though they were precious treasures. She could not bear the thought of those papers burning. So she risked her life for them. And Merlin followed after her. Of course he did. What sane person would let his mother burn in flames? So he followed her, trying to get her out of there. He remembered finding her coughing amidst the flames while clutching a half-burned folder against her chest. He remembered dragging her toward the exit. And he remembered the ceiling collapsing above him before everything turned into unbearable agony. The fire consumed him completely. Even after rescue he survived for 3 days within the hospital. 3 days of endless pain despite all the medication doctors gave him. 3 days of hearing his mother cry beside his bed. She apologized constantly, again and again, as though his death was her fault. That hurt him more than the burns themselves. Because he knew she would blame herself forever. For Merlin, death had been terrifying. But for his mother, living afterward would be far crueler. Eventually, death showed mercy on his excruciating pain, and darkness consumed him. And that should have been the end. Yet somehow it was not. Instead he woke up naked inside a cold dark forest beneath an unfamiliar sky. At first he genuinely thought he had lost his mind. No heavenly god greeted him, nor did a beautiful goddess with a generous breasts explain his mission. No magical being offered him blessings. He simply woke up alone and confused in the middle of nowhere without clothes or answers. Embarrassingly naked like a newborn baby, though this one was clearly a rather large one. Merlin rubbed his face tiredly at the memory. Back then he had desperately searched for clues about the body he occupied. He thought perhaps he had possessed someone else. Maybe memories would appear eventually. But nothing came. The only memories inside his mind belonged to his old life. Eventually, while wandering through the wilderness, he encountered bandits. Unfortunately for him, they quickly noticed his appearance. Instead of killing him immediately, they decided to sell him in Essos. Some joked about selling him to wealthy nobles while others laughed that rich women would pay fortunes for a face like his. That experience taught Merlin very quickly that beauty in Westeros could become a curse. It was during his captivity that he learned where and when he was. Westeros. During the reign of the Mad King. At first he nearly refused to believe it. But after hearing names like Riverrun and Tully, his heart sank. He truly existed inside the world of Game of Thrones. A world he knew was filled with endless death, misery, betrayal and madness. Fortunately, fate intervened before the bandits could sell him away. Their camp was attacked one night by unknown forces, which allowed Merlin to escape amidst the chaos. And shortly afterward his so-called system finally appeared. At first he had been hopeful. Every transmigrator in novels possessed some overpowered cheat ability. Surely his would be the same. He was wrong, dead wrong. The system possessed only 2 functions. A shop and fate points. Nothing else. He could only purchase abilities through fate points. At first he struggled to understand how to obtain them. Eventually, through trial and error, he discovered that changing fate and influencing lives earned him points. Saving people, changing events, killing important individuals, all these actions generated fate points. One of the first times he earned points occurred near a pleasure house where he intervened to save a woman being violently abused by a cruel client. Merlin nearly got himself killed afterward when the man chased him through the streets in fury. Still, the system rewarded him with 10 fate points. That moment gave him hope. Using those points he unlocked the shop. And immediately became disappointed again. The system shop contained multiple phases for purchasing items, though only the first phase was currently unlocked. Everything within it came from the world of Harry Potter, spells, potions, and magical items. Still, Merlin had noticed a few basic items and bits of knowledge from this world listed as well, such as languages and common historical knowledge, though they were surprisingly expensive. Even the cheapest wand cost him 10 fate points. Still he purchased it. A plain, ordinary wand. Nothing about it was special, not that he was an expert in wand making. Afterward he bought the cheapest spells available or the ones he could afford. Yet another cruel problem soon appeared. Every single spell required fate points to cast. Merlin had nearly exploded in rage when he discovered that. At first he thought the system was broken. He demanded answers repeatedly until finally the system offered information in exchange for more fate points. After painfully gathering enough points, he purchased the explanation. The answer nearly made him curse the heavens. Magic within Westeros had weakened tremendously after the death of dragons. Old Valyrian magic no longer flowed properly through the world, which meant Merlin's Harry Potter magic lacked the magical foundation necessary to function naturally. So the system compensated using fate points as fuel. Without fate points he could barely cast anything. Even worse, casting spells without officially purchasing them from the shop consumed enormous amounts of points. Immobilis alone cost him 10 fate points per cast despite already owning the spell. The stronger the magic became, the more horrifying the cost. The Imperious Curse he used on the shipmaster was a one-time use, which cost him 1,000 fate points just to cast without purchasing it. He needed far more fate points to purchase the spell, and after using it, it nearly drained his life. Merlin had spent many nights cursing whoever threw him into this world without giving him a truly overpowered cheat. Still, despite his frustration, he remained grateful. At least he had something. If used intelligently, magic could still become terrifying within Westeros. Eventually he searched for a permanent solution. Again the system demanded fate points for information. Again Merlin painfully paid. And the answer it gave him changed everything. To restore magic fully he needed dragons. Dragons acted as catalysts for ancient Valyrian magic. If dragons returned, then magical energy within the world would gradually revive. Spells would become easier, cheaper, perhaps even free eventually. That revelation filled him with hope. Until he checked the price of dragon eggs. 1 million fate points. Merlin had nearly fainted on the spot. Hatching one required 10,000 fate points. The dream of hatching one was immediately shattered. Daenerys Targaryen had not even been born yet, which meant waiting for her dragons would take over a decade. So Merlin reached a conclusion. If he could not restore magic directly, then he would gather fate points by changing history itself. And what greater way existed than interfering with the events of Robert's rebellion? At first, he considered saving Rhaegar Targaryen during the Battle of the Trident, or even kidnapping him beforehand, which might have earned him a great number of fate points. Which it was a ridiculous and a stupid idea. Even he admitted that now. Killing Robert Baratheon sounded even more impossible. By the time Merlin moved toward the Riverlands, the battle had already begun. He was far too distant to interfere, and he knew that by the time he arrived, it would already be over and his efforts would have been for nothing. Then another opportunity appeared. He learned in a tavern that Tywin Lannister was marching on King's Landing. And suddenly Merlin remembered Elia Martell, the innocent princess brutally murdered alongside her children. Even years before transmigrating, their deaths had disgusted him whenever he read about them. So he made his choice. He would try to save them. Merlin infiltrated the Lannister army by pretending to be a servant. He cooked meals, carried supplies, washed armor, and remained invisible among thousands of soldiers. Though unfortunately his face made true invisibility impossible. Many soldiers mocked him endlessly. The maiden's favorite, Silk Face. Pretty little insults thrown around by drunken men surrounded by filth and war. Some laughed, others stared at his face in disgust and envy. And a few became lustful, which was dangerous. During those days Merlin learned another important truth. The more influence a person possessed, the more fate points their death or survival generated. That knowledge eventually pushed him toward his first kill. A soldier in the camp had developed a twisted fetish for him. Night after night the man targeted him with growing boldness, his intentions becoming sickeningly clear. Merlin understood exactly what would happen if he allowed things to continue. So one night he acted first. He killed the man quietly beneath darkness before dumping the body far from camp. For days afterward paranoia consumed him. Every approaching footstep terrified him. Yet nobody cared. Some assumed the soldier deserted. Others ignored it entirely. And slowly Merlin realized something horrifying. Killing became easier after the first time. That realization disturbed him deeply. Still, it gave him enough courage to pursue his real targets. Esser Gregor Clegane, Amory Lorch, the monsters destined to butcher Elia and her children. Finally, when the Lannister army reached King's Landing, Merlin stole armor and followed the Mountain's men into the city during the sack. And now here he stood upon a ship sailing away from the burning capital itself. Alive and well, Merlin exhaled slowly as translucent blue screens appeared before his eyes. Host, Merlin. Fate points, 365. Spells, Scourgify, Immobilis, Lumos. He should have possessed far more points. Unfortunately he had spent over 200 on healing potions after the battle. Using the Imperious Curse without purchasing it had nearly drained another 1,000 fate points entirely. The spell itself cost 2,500 fate points to permanently unlock. A horrifying amount, still he had no choice. Without it, escaping King's Landing successfully might have been impossible. Merlin stared at the sea quietly. The system still had not rewarded him fully for saving Elia and the children. Which meant their fate remained uncertain. They were not truly safe yet. Only once history completely changed would the reward arrive. Even so, he knew the eventual payout would be enormous. He had altered one of the most significant tragedies in Westerosi history. Princess Elia Martell lived. Rhaenys lived. Aegon lived. The consequences of that alone could shake the future of the Seven Kingdoms. A small smile slowly formed upon Merlin's face. At the very least, killing Gregor Clegane had been satisfying, though the fate point reward for it had disappointed him greatly. Apparently even monsters had less influence than he expected. Merlin chuckled softly beneath his breath before speaking quietly to himself. It is like hitting two dragons with one arrow. The absurdity of the phrase made him laugh slightly. Then silence returned once more. The wind brushed against his face while the morning sun slowly rose above the waters of Blackwater Bay. Elia Martell's POV. Elia woke to a thin band of sunlight cutting through the small round window of the ship's cabin. It fell across the wooden walls in a trembling golden line, shifting gently with the movement of the sea outside. For a moment she did not understand where she was. Her mind, still tangled in sleep and memory, reached for the familiar shape of her chambers in the Red Keep, for silk curtains and still air and the distant sound of guards in polished armor. Pick. Instead there was the slow creak of timber, the soft rise and fall of the sea beneath her, and the faint scent of salt and tar. Her breath caught at the unfamiliar feeling of being somewhere she was not accustomed to. Then, the moment she cleared her head, everything came flooding back at once. She sat upright so quickly that the thin blanket slipped from her shoulders. The motion sent a sharp ache through her body, not from injury alone but from exhaustion that had settled into her bones like a second skin. Her eyes widened as she took in the narrow space around her. The cabin was small, built for travel rather than comfort. A low bed against one wall, a table fixed to the floor, and scattered belongings tied down to prevent them from shifting with the ship. And beside her, curled into sleep, was her son, Aegon. Elia stared at him for a long moment, as if afraid he might disappear if she blinked too hard. His small chest rose and fell steadily. One tiny hand rested near his cheek, his silver hair falling across his forehead in soft strands. He looked peaceful in a way that made something deep in her chest loosen, something that had been clenched so tightly for so long she had almost forgotten what relief felt like. Only when she was certain he was truly there did she exhale. Her gaze moved slowly, carefully, as though afraid to disturb the fragile safety of the moment. On the floor, near the foot of the bed, her lady-in-waiting lay asleep. The woman had wrapped herself in a thin cloak, using it as a makeshift blanket. One arm stretched protectively toward the children even in sleep, as if her duty did not pause even in dreams. Clinging to her side was Rhaenys, Elia's daughter, her small form pressed close for warmth and comfort. Elia's throat tightened. For a heartbeat, she could not breathe properly. Rhaenys was alive, and so was Aegon. Both of her children were alive. The realization did not come gently. It struck her with painful force, sharp and overwhelming, and she pressed a hand against her mouth to keep herself silent. Memories came rushing back uninvited. The screams of dying servants. The smoke from the burning city. Blood staining the stone floors of the Red Keep. The sound of steel clashing in the very place where she and her children should have been safest. She remembered the giant man. The brute force of him. The way the world had narrowed into terror and helplessness. She remembered thinking, with cold certainty, that this was where everything ended. Her children taken from her. Her line erased. Her life had been reduced to one final, cruel moment, witnessing the deaths of her beloved son and daughter. Her chest tightened painfully as the memory returned in full detail. She closed her eyes for a moment, forcing herself to breathe through it. In and out. Slow and careful, the ways she had been taught as a princess of Dorne, where survival was not always about strength but about endurance. But even endurance had its limits. Her thoughts drifted, unwillingly, to Rhaegar. The ache in her chest deepened into something more complicated. Not only grief, but anger, humiliation, and a strange lingering sorrow she had never fully been able to bury. There had been a time when she had loved him. Not the love of songs or foolish dreams, but something quieter, built from duty and shared hopes. She had been chosen for him, and he had been chosen for her, a bond between House Martell and House Targaryen that was meant to strengthen both kingdoms. At first she had believed it could be more than politics. He had been kind then, gentle in ways that surprised her. Charismatic, thoughtful, always with a distant look in his eyes as if he were listening to music no one else could hear. She had wanted to believe that she understood him, that she might truly matter to him, and that perhaps they were meant to be with each other. But then the Harrenhal tourney happened, shattering everything for both of them, and she awoke from the foolish fantasy she had built within her own mind. The memory was still sharp enough to cut her heart to pieces. The moment her husband placed the crown of blue roses upon Lyanna Stark instead of her. The sudden silence that fell over the crowd. The change in the atmosphere as she remained standing there, humiliated, while her husband rode past her toward a girl of only 12. She still remembered the heat rising to her face, the unbearable weight of watching eyes, and the humiliation that spread among the gathered nobles like wildfire. Her brother Aberon had been there. She remembered his expression more clearly than anything else. At first, there had only been disbelief, not anger. Then he looked at her while she felt too ashamed to even meet his eyes. But the moment he saw her expression, that familiar protective look returned to his face, followed by a dangerous scowl, as though he were prepared to kill Rhaegar for hurting her. Even then, she saw how hard he struggled to contain himself for her sake. Elia had done what she always did. She had endured, smiled when she should smile, stayed silent when silence was expected, carried herself with dignity even when it felt like something inside her was cracking. She had told herself many times that it was a political move. That Rhaegar was trying to win favor with the North. That there was a reason behind it all, something she did not yet understand. But understanding did not erase shame. Then came the birth of Rhaenys, her daughter, who had not inherited her father's Valyrian silver hair or purple eyes, but instead looked like a Dornish child. This stirred uncomfortable whispers among the nobles and the court. Some even speculated that the child was not Rhaegar's and had been fathered by another man. They claimed Rhaegar had taken revenge on Elia for her supposed infidelity, and that his actions at the Harrenhal tourney were meant as a sign of defiance against her and House Martell. She had hoped, even then, that things might settle. That the court would accept her daughter. That her position as princess and wife would shield her child from cruelty. It did not. The king had looked upon Rhaenys with cold disapproval, speaking words that still haunted Elia in quiet moments. Words that questioned her child, her honor, her place. Even Rhaegar, for all his defense of her, could not fully protect her from the cruel whispers that followed. And then Aegon was born. For a brief moment, there had been joy. Rhaegar had held the child with something like reverence, speaking of prophecy, of a coming day, of a destiny, of a song of ice and fire. He had said the words with such conviction that even Elia, exhausted and uncertain, had felt a flicker of hope. But that hope, and the happiness that came with it, did not last long either. The maesters had spoken of her health and the risks of further pregnancies, as well as the limitations she could not escape. If she were to become pregnant again, she could lose her life, and even the birth of a healthy child would be very difficult. And Rhaegar had grown distant again, especially the moment he learned that she would not be able to bear him another child. Something consumed the prince, something she knew nothing about, pulling him further and further away from her and their children. And finally, she learned the reason for her husband's distance when news came that he had allegedly kidnapped Lyanna Stark, a 14-year-old girl, after killing her guards. The realm soon began to fracture under the weight of it, which shattered Elia deeply and destroyed her hope of ever regaining the loving life she had once dreamed of with him. And the last time she heard of him was when he returned to the Red Keep and was sent back to battle by the king. She never got the chance to question him or ask why he had done it. Did he still believe in that meaningless prophecy? Was it because of it that he acted as he did, or did he truly love that girl? She never found out, as she was locked in her chambers by the king, and Rhaegar once again vanished without seeing her or their children, riding into war and leaving Elia behind in a court that grew more dangerous with each passing day. She opened her eyes again. The cabin felt smaller now, as if her memories had filled the space too tightly. That truth anchored her more firmly than anything else. But beneath the relief lingered something else. Confusion filled her thoughts about the man who had changed everything, the man who had saved her and her children when she was at the depths of despair and near death. At the time, she had hoped Rhaegar would come and save them from the hands of beasts, but she knew he could not, for her husband was long dead. Yet it seemed the Seven had shown her mercy and sent another man to her rescue. Merlin. She knew almost nothing about him, only his name, spoken briefly during the events of the previous day, so she had not had the chance to know him. He was a man who had appeared when the world was collapsing around her. He had saved her children. That fact alone should have erased all doubt. But it had not, because he did not fit into anything she understood. Not knight, not assassin, not an envoy or a spy. And that unknown nature unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Elia moved carefully from the bed, placing her feet on the wooden floor. The ship shifted gently beneath her, reminding her that she was far from the safety of any kingdom. She adjusted her clothing with practiced grace, smoothing the fabric of her dress, trying to restore some sense of composure. Behind her, Mary stirred at her subtle movements. A soft voice broke the quiet. "My lady, where are you going?" Elia turned to her slightly. Her lady-in-waiting had awakened, eyes half open with concern already forming. Elia offered her a small, reassuring smile. "I need some air," she said, already reaching for the cabin door. "I want to see the ocean for a while." Mary pushed herself up immediately, alarm sharpening her expression. "Let me come with you, my lady. There are strangers aboard this ship. It is not safe for you to walk alone." Elia shook her head gently. "It's fine. You need to rest. And the children will need someone if they wake up, so help me take care of them until I return." Mary glanced toward the sleeping children, hesitation flickering across her face. "Duty warred with worry." Elia softened her tone. "Nothing will happen. I will not go far. I only wish for a moment of quiet." Reluctantly, Mary nodded. "Then at least return quickly." "I will." Elia turned toward the door. Her hand rested briefly on the wood before she opened it. For a moment she paused, looking back at her children one last time. The sight of them, safe and breathing, was enough to steady her resolve. Then she stepped out. When Elia finally stepped out into the open air, the brightness of the late morning struck her like a gentle force. It took her a few moments to adjust, her eyes narrowing slightly as the sun spilled across the wooden deck in shifting bands of gold and white. The world felt larger out here, unconfined, as if the sky itself had expanded after the suffocating walls of the cabin. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction. It was not merely water. It was endless movement, a vast expanse of blue and silver shifting beneath the rising sun. The wind rolled across the sea in unseen waves, carrying the sharp scent of salt with it. It brushed against her face, stirred her hair, and tugged softly at her clothes as they rippled around her body. For a moment, she simply stood there, breathing in slowly. The air was different here. Cooler, fresher. It carried the scent of the sea and the wildness of open winds, nothing like the heavy, suffocating air of the Red Keep. As it filled her lungs, she realized how long it had been since breathing had felt this easy. She stayed there for a while in silence, letting the wind wash over her. Beneath her feet, the ship creaked and swayed with the rhythm of the sea, a quiet reminder that she was still being carried forward by a path she had never truly chosen. Eventually, she pulled her eyes away from the sea and looked across the deck. The crew moved with practiced ease, hands busy with ropes, sails, and weathered rigging. Short commands passed between them, their voices snatched apart by the wind almost as soon as they were spoken. There was a calm rhythm to their work, the kind that came only from years spent upon the sea. A few of them noticed her. Their glances lingered just a moment longer than necessary. Some were curious, some cautious. A few simply stared before quickly looking away when they realized they had been caught. Elia did not react to their strange gazes because she was used to them. From a young age, she had been under constant attention in royal courts, among small folk, and in the halls of powerful men. She had always been watched, sometimes with respect, sometimes with pity, and sometimes with something far less kind. Over the years, she had learned to carry herself through it all, letting attention pass over her like wind over stone. So she simply moved her gaze onward. She wasn't looking for admiration in these men. She was looking for one man. Merlin. She had never truly seen his face yesterday. The memories she carried of him remained the same, a figure beneath a Lannister helmet, obscured by the violence and chaos of the day. All she knew with certainty was that he was tall, broad-shouldered, a presence that did not seem to belong in any court or army she had ever known. None of the men nearby matched that description. They were sailors, lean from work and wind, their bodies shaped by ropes and tides rather than what she was familiar with. None stood apart in the way she was searching for. Elia stepped forward slowly, her eyes continuing to scan the deck. Then she saw him. At the far side of the ship, where the railing met open sea, a man stood alone. He was standing alone by the stern rail, where the sea stretched out wide and dark. One hand rested on the wood, body swaying easy with the boat's rhythm. He looked relaxed, almost careless, but she could tell he wasn't. That kind of quiet carried weight. The wind moved through his hair. It was long, black, and striking in the morning light, shifting like dark silk against the pale sky. Under the sun it almost resembled obsidian, as if each strand held a fragment of night refusing to be washed away. Elia felt something in her chest tighten slightly. Even from a distance, something about him marked him as different. She began to walk toward him. With each step, more of him came into focus. The broadness of his shoulders. The quiet steadiness in the way he stood. There was something restrained about him, a faint weariness beneath his composure, as though he had spent years teaching himself not to waste energy on unnecessary movement. And then she was close enough to speak. Her voice, when it came, was softer than she intended. Sir Merlin. The words were careful, almost uncertain, as though she were testing whether the name belonged to him at all. The man stiffened slightly. It was subtle, a brief tightening of posture, but Elia noticed it immediately. Then he turned, and the moment he faced her fully, everything else seemed to fall away. Elia had seen beauty before in courts and royal ceremonies. She had seen her brother bring men from every corner of Westeros and Essos as his lovers, men known for their beauty. She had seen the beauty of her husband and the Targaryens as well, so she was accustomed to it. She had learned long ago that beauty alone meant very little in the world she lived in. But his face did not feel like something constructed. It was striking in a way that made her pause and take a deep breath without meaning to. Strong features with a delicate touch, something quite different from what she knew, as if his face had been shaped by the hands of gods themselves. Yet it was his eyes that held her most completely. They were silver. Not the dull gray she had seen in northern lords, nor the pale stone color of winterborn men. These were something else entirely. They caught the light in a way that made them seem almost alive, as if the sun itself reflected differently within them. For a brief moment, Elia could not look away. They reminded her, strangely, of moonlight on still water, cold in origin, yet beautiful in its quiet clarity. There was something ancient in them too, something that did not belong easily to the present world. Her heartbeat quickened before she could stop it. The reaction was sudden and completely unexpected, and the fact that it happened at all caught her off guard. She felt warmth rise in her cheeks and immediately forced herself to look away, breaking the gaze with deliberate control. Enough, Elia, she thought. You're not some young maiden who gets weak-kneed at the sight of a handsome face, Elia thought, annoyed with herself. You're a mother of two. You've no business being rattled by a man's eyes. Pick. She steadied her expression, smoothing her features into composure. Across from her, she heard a low voice. Good morning, my lady. Though by the position of the sun, I believe it is closer to noon. There was warmth in his tone. Not mockery or arrogance. Something lighter, almost amused, but gentle enough that it did not feel offensive. Elia hesitated, then allowed a small smile to form. Good morning. Her voice sounded more collected now. He studied her for a moment, then continued. Have you rested well? The ship is not the most comfortable place to recover from, yesterday. The pause in his words carried weight, as if he too was choosing carefully how much to reference. Elia nodded slightly. Yes, I am well rested now. Thank you for asking. A brief silence followed, not uncomfortable, but uncertain, like the space between two people who did not yet know what to make of each other. Then Elia spoke again. When will we reach Dragonstone? By tonight, we should be able to see the island. If the winds remain favorable, we may arrive by tomorrow night. Relief flickered through her at the answer. She exhaled slowly. That is good. Her thoughts shifted immediately, as they often did now, toward safety. Is there any possibility we could sail to Dornay instead? The question came out more urgent than she intended. She continued quickly, as if trying to justify it. My brothers would ensure our protection. Dragonstone is not safe. If the rebels truly intend to move against the crown, that island will be among their first targets. She watched his reaction carefully. Merlin did not answer immediately. Instead, he exhaled softly, as though considering not just the question but everything behind it. Then he spoke. Unfortunately, that is not possible. The ship we are on is not made for long voyages. It is a fishing vessel, not built for distance or defense. He paused briefly before continuing. And there is another issue. I overheard the Lannister soldiers before we left. Stannis Baratheon is under siege while the Redwyne fleet blockades the sea routes near the Stormlands. If we attempt to sail south toward Dornay, we would very likely cross paths with them, especially since northern forces have been sent to lift the siege. There will be war there, so sailing that way is far too dangerous. Elia's expression tightened slightly. That was not a meeting she could afford. So Dragonstone remained the only option. She let out a controlled breath, the tension in her shoulders easing only slightly. I understand. A pause followed. Then, almost without thinking, her gaze drifted to the object in his hand. A slender wooden stick. It did not resemble anything she had ever seen used as a weapon or tool, yet she had witnessed it unleash forces she could not explain. Light that moved like arrows, spreading in unnatural silence and striking its target. She saw a blue light shoot from it toward the Lannister soldiers, freezing them in place, a sight she could not easily understand. Her curiosity, despite everything, surfaced again. What is that wooden stick you carry? The question seemed to amuse him. A faint chuckle escaped him, quiet but genuine. It was the second time she had heard him laugh at her. Once for mispronouncing his name. Now for something else entirely. It is called a wand. He lifted it slightly as if to demonstrate. It helps me channel magic more precisely. Elia's eyes narrowed slightly in thought. Magic, are you a follower of the Lord of Light? The question came naturally. She had heard of red priests before, of flame and prophecy and sacrifice. Men and women who claimed to see truth in fire. Merlin shook his head immediately. No, I am not. He paused, then added simply. I am a wizard. Elia blinked in confusion. A wizard, yes. Someone who studies and uses magic directly. It is not tied to a god or ritual in my case. Her curiosity deepened despite herself. Do you offer sacrifices for it? The question made him raise an eyebrow slightly. Sacrifices, yes. The followers of the Lord of Light are known for such practices. Merlin exhaled, shaking his head again. No, nothing like that. My magic does not require sacrifice. It is drawn from within and from the world around us. From nature itself, if you will. It is stored and shaped through focus. He paused briefly, then added something that made her even more uncertain. It is connected, in some ways, to very old forms of magic. Ancient Valyrian practices, though not identical. Elia studied him carefully. She had read enough histories to know that Valyria was a word often surrounded by myth and half-truth. Dragons, blood magic, lost knowledge. But nothing she had ever read described something like what stood before her now. And yet, even after seeing it with her own eyes, a small doubt still lingered within her. Not distrust exactly, but uncertainty. The kind that comes when the world refuses to behave according to what you have been taught. Her gaze drifted again to his face. He was still speaking, something about control and energy, but her attention faltered for a moment. Because despite everything she had endured, despite everything she had lost in the last days, she found herself thinking something she immediately scolded herself for. That he was, in a very quiet and unhelpful way, far too distracting to be around. Elia looked away again quickly, forcing her thoughts back into order. She was not here for this. She was here because her children were alive. Because survival still mattered more than anything else. And because the man standing before her was either their salvation or something she had not yet learned to fear properly. Merlin looked at the young woman standing before him in silence. The sea wind moved gently through her dark hair as she remained deep in thought, her gaze distant as though she were trying to understand something that refused to fit within the limits of her knowledge. He could not tell whether she was reassured by his explanation or disturbed by it. Perhaps both. To him, her expression looked almost judgmental. Not openly hostile, but thoughtful in a way that made him wonder what conclusion she was reaching about him. Though, to be fair, he could hardly blame her. He had just told her a half-truth. His magic technically did have a connection to ancient Valyrian sorcery. Just not in the way she imagined. The magic of Valyria belonged to the distant past of this world, while what Merlin carried within himself belonged to something far beyond it. Still, if he succeeded in what he intended to do in the future, if he truly revived what had long vanished from the world, then perhaps his words were not entirely false after all. It was half truth and half lie. And in Westeros, sometimes that was safer than honesty. Especially when it came to magic. Most people in the Seven Kingdoms feared sorcery. The faith of the Seven in particular viewed anything unnatural with suspicion or outright hatred. Witches, fire priests, blood rituals, strange Eastern mystics, all of them were treated as dangerous at best and cursed at worst. Which meant that from Elia's perspective, he probably appeared deeply suspicious. A strange man who wielded impossible powers with a carved wooden stick while speaking casually about magic as if it were no more unusual than swordsmanship. Honestly, he would have been suspicious too. Merlin was about to say something else when hurried footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Both he and Elia turned toward the sound immediately. A man came rushing across the deck toward them. Simon, or rather, Soman, as the sailors pronounced it with their rough accents. The moment Merlin saw the man's panicked expression, his grip instinctively tightened around his wand beneath his sleeve. For a brief second, he wondered whether the imperious curse he had cast the previous night had somehow weakened. After all, placing the spell on a complete innocent stranger for an extended period was not something he would be proud of. Even though he had subtly planted the idea that Simon had willingly helped them for a reasonable amount of coin, there was always the possibility of resistance. But when the man finally reached them, there was no accusation in his eyes. Only fear. Sir Knight, Simon said breathlessly, struggling to steady himself. My crew spotted a large ship coming from the direction of Dragonstone. It is sailing toward us. At this rate, we may encounter it within a few hours. The words immediately changed the atmosphere. Elia stiffened beside him. Merlin's expression sharpened as he heard those words. Can you identify the sails? Merlin asked quickly. Any visible symbols? Simon shook his head. Not clearly yet. The sails are black, that much we can see. If it gets closer, perhaps we will recognize the markings. Merlin nodded once. Take us where you saw it. Without wasting another moment, the three of them moved across the deck toward the front of the ship. The wind had grown slightly stronger now, the sea rougher beneath them than before. Merlin narrowed his eyes as he looked toward the horizon. At first he saw nothing. Then finally, far in the distance, a tiny shape appeared against the vast blue sea. It was a ship. Even from this distance, the dark sails were visible. Elia stepped slightly closer beside him, her eyes focused carefully upon the approaching vessel. I believe it belongs to the royal fleet, she said quietly. Merlin glanced toward her. And what makes you think that, my lady? Elia did not take her eyes off the distant ship as she answered. The royal fleet often uses black sails bearing the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. Dragonstone also houses a large portion of the Crown's naval strength, around 160 ships if I remember correctly, with nearly 80 war galleys among them. So unless the Queen sent the ship out for attacking an enemy or spying on nearby lords, this should be a royal vessel. There was confidence in her voice now. Not the uncertain woman from moments ago, but a princess raised among politics, alliances, and military discussions. Merlin absorbed the information quickly. I doubt the queen would send such ships away while Dragonstone remains vulnerable, he replied. Especially after the fall of King's Landing. If that vessel truly belongs to the royal fleet, it is likely a patrol ship guarding the surrounding waters. Elia visibly relaxed at his words. Merlin noticed how she let out a breath she had been holding. He continued observing the distant vessel carefully before speaking again. "Soman." The sailor immediately straightened. "Yes, sir. Maintain our course. A ship that size would eventually catch us even if we attempted to flee. Running would only make us appear suspicious." Soman nodded nervously. "And if it truly belongs to the royal fleet, then this encounter may actually work in our favor." The sailor swallowed before hurrying back toward the crew to relay orders. Silence settled once more. Merlin stood beside Elia at the railing while the distant black-sailed ship slowly grew larger against the horizon. The sound of waves crashing against wood filled the quiet between them. Minutes passed as neither of them spoke, both continuing to watch the ship, until Elia finally broke the silence. "Do you think he is dead?" The sudden question pulled Merlin from his thoughts. He turned toward her slightly. "Who?" She looked out toward the sea as she answered. "The king, Aerys Targaryen." "Ah." Merlin's expression became thoughtful for a moment before he nodded in certainty. "Yes, he is dead." Elia's eyes shifted toward him immediately. "I heard rumors among the dockworkers last night," Merlin continued calmly. "Apparently one of his own Kingsguard killed him during the fall of the city. He intentionally left out Jaime Lannister's name, since it would not yet be known to everyone who had killed the king. There was no reason to complicate matters further by revealing what only a select few knew." Elia stood quietly, eyes fixed on the ocean. Then a smile came over her, slow and unexpected, warm and entirely real. The sight honestly surprised Merlin. "How ironic," she said softly. "To be killed by the very knight sworn to protect him." There was satisfaction in her voice. Deep satisfaction. Merlin blinked once before letting out a quiet breath. "You should probably avoid saying that with such a pleased expression, my lady," he said lightly. "Someone might accuse you of treason." Elia turned toward him fully then. And to Merlin's surprise, her smile widened slightly. "Oh, I stopped fearing such accusations long ago," she replied. "Besides, I imagine half the realm will smile exactly as I did once they hear the news." Years of bitterness bled through her calm tone. "I've waited so long to hear that man is dead." Merlin studied her quietly. The hatred in her voice was real. And honestly, after everything he had heard about Aerys Targaryen, he could not entirely blame her for it. Whatever experiences she had endured beneath the Mad King's rule had clearly left scars deeper than simple resentment. For a moment he almost pitied her. Almost. Sympathy, after all, couldn't rewrite reality. Merlin exhaled softly before speaking again. "My lady, once that ship draws nearer, it would be best if you return to your cabin." Elia frowned immediately. "Why only me? If it truly belongs to the royal fleet, revealing my identity would ensure their assistance. They are sworn to protect the royal family." "In theory," Merlin replied calmly. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You disagree. I prefer caution." He looked toward the approaching vessel again. "We don't know who commands that ship. Nor do we know what news has already spread across the realm. If they are loyal, then revealing you changes nothing. But if they are not." He let the sentence remain unfinished. Elia understood anyway. Merlin continued. "If possible, I would rather avoid unnecessary attention. We may still be able to pass as ordinary travelers before they decide to inspect us closely." She looked unconvinced. "That seems unlikely." "It does," Merlin admitted. "But unlikely chances are still chances." Elia fell silent for a moment before finally nodding slightly. "Very well." Merlin relaxed slightly, then said, "And one more thing." She looked at him curiously. "If possible, I would appreciate it if you didn't mention that I am a wizard." That earned him a faintly amused look from her. "You fear people discovering your secret." "I fear people attempting to burn me alive for it," Merlin replied dryly. To his relief, that actually made her laugh softly. A quiet sound carried away slightly by the sea wind. Then Merlin lightly touched the wand hidden beneath his sleeve. Besides, he added, there is a good chance we may need this later if things become unpleasant. It is better if fewer people know about it. Elia studied him for another long moment. Then, surprisingly, her expression softened. Of course, Sir Merlin. Your secret is safe with me. Merlin smiled faintly. Well, thank you. But I should remind you again that I am not actually a knight. There was amusement in his voice now. You can simply call me Merlin. Elia looked at him briefly. Then, without answering, she turned gracefully and began walking back toward the cabin. Merlin watched her go for a moment, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly despite himself. Then his attention returned to the sea. Far ahead of them, the black-sailed ship continued cutting through the water, drawing close. With every passing minute. It was nearing afternoon when the distant vessel finally became clear enough for Merlin to properly observe. Elia had been right. The ship truly belonged to the royal fleet. Its sails were black as night, and stretched across the dark cloth was the crimson three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. Even from afar the vessel looked enormous compared to the small fishing ship beneath Merlin's feet. Its thick wooden hull towered above the waves like some sea beast gliding across the ocean with calm confidence. And unlike the humble fishing vessel, this ship had been built for war. Rows of armored men lined its deck. Spears and bows gleamed beneath the afternoon sun while Targaryen banners fluttered fiercely in the sea wind. The atmosphere immediately turned tense as the massive ship slowed before anchoring itself beside them. The size difference alone was intimidating. The royal vessel loomed beside the fisherman's ship like a predator beside prey. Merlin could feel the nervousness spreading among Soman's crew. Several sailors avoided looking directly at the armed men across from them while others whispered anxiously beneath their breath. Meanwhile the soldiers aboard the royal vessel stared down at them with cold suspicion. A man eventually stepped forward from among the armored sailors. He appeared to be middle-aged, broad-shouldered despite his age, with a long dark beard and a shaved head weathered by years at sea. His armor was different from the others, more refined and decorated with the sigil of House Targaryen across the chest. Clearly the commander or at least the shipmaster. When he spoke, his voice carried easily over the sea. Who are you? He demanded coldly. And who commands this vessel? Let him step forward. Soman swallowed nervously before stepping beside Merlin. I am the shipmaster, Sir, he answered respectfully. What can I do for you, honorable knight? The man looked him over carefully. Then his gaze slowly swept across the small fishing ship with visible disdain. What is a fisherman's ship doing this far from shore? He asked sharply. Don't tell me the fish of Blackwater Bay have all vanished and forced you this deep into open waters. A few soldiers behind him chuckled quietly. Soman shook his head quickly. No, Sir. We are not fishing. We are merely passing through. The Targaryen shipmaster narrowed his eyes slightly. He observed the ship again carefully, lingering briefly on Merlin before returning his attention to Soman. What is your name, shipmaster? Soman, Sir. And where did you sail from? King's Landing. That answer immediately changed the atmosphere. The man's expression sharpened. King's Landing, he repeated slowly. Then tell me, Soman, what news comes from the capital? Soman hesitated briefly before replying. We were not allowed inside the city itself, Sir. But from what we heard, he swallowed. The city has fallen to the usurper's forces. Lord Tywin Lannister betrayed the crown and seized King's Landing. A grim silence followed. And the king? The shipmaster asked quietly. Soman lowered his head slightly. They say the king has joined the stranger's embrace. The Targaryen commander clicked his tongue in visible irritation. For a moment he looked away toward the sea as if restraining his anger before finally returning his attention to them. Where are you headed? Dragonstone. The answer earned an immediate sneer. Well, unfortunately for you, the man replied coldly, you will not be going any farther. The royal fleet patrols these waters under Her Grace's orders. No ship is permitted to approach Dragonstone without authorization. He pointed toward the horizon behind them. You will turn around and sail elsewhere. Merlin frowned slightly. That complicated things, he thought. He stood silently for a few seconds, weighing his options carefully. Should he reveal Elia's identity now? Or continue trying to avoid attention? Honestly, if things truly became dangerous, he could still escape. Himself, Elia, and the children at least. Magic gave him possibilities ordinary men simply did not have. Still, avoiding conflict remained preferable. So Merlin decided to gamble slightly. He stepped forward calmly. "I am afraid we cannot do that," he said. "We carry very important passengers who must reach Dragonstone as soon as possible." The shipmaster looked at him slowly. His gaze lingered openly this time. "Oh," he said mockingly. "Then tell me, boy, who exactly is this important passenger traveling aboard a fishing boat?" Merlin resisted the urge to sigh. Being called boy in a mocking tone irritated him more than it should have, as he had a rather unpleasant history whenever someone used it. Still, he kept his expression calm. The royal family. The words immediately caused murmurs among the soldiers aboard the larger ship. Merlin continued before anyone could interrupt. "We are transporting Princess Elia Martell and her children to Dragonstone for their safety." For one heartbeat there was silence. Then the shipmaster burst into laughter. The soldiers behind him joined in. The man turned his head slightly toward his crew with open amusement. "Did you hear that?" he barked. "Now every dock rat and flea-bitten gutterborn in the realm claims to be savior to dragons." More laughter followed. Merlin internally cringed. Gods, this really did feel exactly like one of those cliché scenes from the countless novels he used to read in his previous life. He had honestly never imagined he would one day stand inside such a situation personally. The shipmaster looked back at him with a smirk. "I see no knights. No royal escort. No warriors worthy of protecting dragon blood." His eyes narrowed mockingly. "All I see is a fish-stinking peasant crew and a pretty-faced boy who looks like he escaped from some pleasure house in Lee." Several soldiers laughed louder at that. Merlin's eye twitched slightly. Very tempting. Very, very tempting to just use magic. Especially when he noticed several archers stepping forward along the enemy deck, arrows already knocked toward the fishing vessel. The shipmaster's expression turned cold again. "Turn your ship around now," he warned. "Or I will sink it where it floats. Spare your men that fate, fishermen." Merlin slowly tightened his grip around his wand beneath his sleeve. One spell. That was all it would take to make this easier. He was already considering exactly which curse to use first when a calm feminine voice suddenly interrupted the tension behind him. "You will do no such thing, shipmaster." Merlin turned immediately, and so did every man aboard both ships as they saw Elia step forward onto the deck. Despite the simple clothes she wore, despite the exhaustion visible upon her face, there was still unmistakable dignity in the way she carried herself. Her posture remained straight, her chin slightly raised, and her dark eyes calm beneath the sea wind moving through her hair. She possessed presence, the kind nobles were born with, one that sharply revealed the difference between highborn and lowborn. Elia stopped beside Merlin and spoke clearly enough for both ships to hear. "I am Elia Martell, Princess of Dorne and wife to Prince Rhaegar Targaryen." At those words, the laughter aboard the royal vessel immediately died. "I command you to fulfill the oath you swore to the Iron Throne. Escort me safely to Dragonstone and bring me before Her Grace the Queen." The shipmaster stared at her carefully. His earlier mockery faded into uncertainty. But suspicion still lingered. "And if you are not truly who you claim to be?" he asked cautiously. "What if you are assassins attempting to infiltrate Dragonstone?" Her Grace and Prince Viserys remain vulnerable. Before Elia could answer, Merlin spoke. "Then are you willing to risk insulting House Martell by denying the identity of Princess Elia without confirmation?" His voice became colder. "Would you truly provoke Dorne and accuse its ruling princess of falsehood without proof?" That visibly struck the man. The hesitation on his face deepened, because Merlin was right. If Elia truly was who she claimed to be, offending her could carry severe consequences. The shipmaster looked between them several times before finally exhaling sharply. "Lower the bows." The tension immediately eased as the archers obeyed. Merlin quietly released the breath he had been holding. Then he leaned slightly closer toward Elia and whispered under his breath. "I honestly thought they would recognize you immediately." Elia sighed softly. "It is not as simple as that." She glanced briefly toward the soldiers watching her. "Most people know me only through rumors. And the descriptions spread among the small folk are," she paused awkwardly, "exaggerated." Merlin noticed faint color touching her cheeks. "Interesting," he thought. Before he could think further, the shipmaster spoke again loudly. Since I cannot confirm your identity personally, I will escort you to Dragonstone where Her Grace may judge the truth herself. Then his gaze hardened slightly. But only you and your children may board our vessel. Elia immediately frowned. But Merlin stepped in first. That is acceptable. She turned toward him in surprise. It is safer this way, Merlin said quietly. Their ship is faster and better defended. Once you are aboard, simply introduce me as your sworn protector. That should allow me to accompany you without issue. Elia hesitated briefly before nodding. Then she addressed the shipmaster loudly. My knight shall accompany me, along with my lady-in-waiting and my children. The commander's eyes shifted toward Merlin skeptically. What kind of knight carries no sword and wears no armor? Merlin nearly rolled his eyes. Honestly, these people had an unhealthy obsession with metal. Still, the shipmaster eventually nodded in agreement. A few sailors quickly moved to prepare a crossing between the two ships. Thick ropes were tied securely between them before a narrow wooden gangplank was carefully lowered across the gap in the water. It swayed slightly with the movement of the waves, unstable but passable. While preparations continued, Merlin walked quietly toward Soman. The fisherman looked nervous. Merlin lowered his voice. Once we depart, sail away from Dragonstone. Don't return to King's Landing immediately. Soman blinked in surprise. Sir, hide somewhere for a month if possible. Things will only grow more dangerous from here. Merlin reached into his robe and pulled out a small pouch filled with coins he had gathered from dead Lannister soldiers and abandoned homes during the chaos. He pressed it into Soman's hands. Use this. Soman stared down at the pouch with widened eyes. Sir Knight, take care of your crew. Merlin smiled faintly. And thank you. You helped save innocent lives. Even if magical mind control had assisted slightly. Soman looked deeply moved. Thank you, Sir. Merlin simply nodded before turning away. At that moment Elia emerged from below deck with Rhaenys beside her and baby Aegon in her arms while Mary followed closely behind. Merlin immediately stepped forward to assist them carefully across the gangplank. The sea shifted restlessly beneath them as they crossed from the small fishing vessel onto the towering royal ship. The moment they reached the deck, the shipmaster's gaze immediately fell upon Aegon. More specifically, upon the child's unmistakable Valyrian features. Silver hair, purple eyes. The man froze as he realized something important. Every trace of suspicion vanished instantly. Then, to Merlin's slight surprise, the hardened commander dropped to one knee before Elia. I beg forgiveness, Your Grace, he said loudly. My actions were born only from caution during these uncertain times. Elia looked down at him calmly while Aegon blinked curiously in her arms. You may rise, she said with composed dignity. I understand your caution. Then her voice grew firmer. Now take us to Dragonstone. I wish to see Her Grace the Queen immediately. The shipmaster rose at once. As you command, Princess. He turned sharply toward his crew. Raise anchor. Full sail to Dragonstone. The deck immediately exploded into motion. Sailors rushed across ropes and rigging while orders echoed across the sea wind. Massive black sails unfurled overhead like dark wings as the great royal vessel slowly turned toward Dragonstone. Standing near the railing, Merlin watched as the small fishing ship gradually drifted away in the opposite direction. Its crew still appeared confused, frightened, and probably completely overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. Honestly, fair enough. Then Merlin turned his gaze forward toward the distant horizon. Toward Dragonstone.